approve of that.
What are we doing?
We're
Waiting for
waiting.
the,
Alright,
okay.
alright, cool. Alright, just call to order here. We have a quorum, everyone in attendance except for Joe Tom, and excused, and it is 6:32, and we'll start with the pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alright, do we have any amendments to the agenda? Heather?
Under old business, could we please put fee schedule? Not have a big discussion about it, just,
Yep.
it's in front of us, so I just want to go over why it's in front of us, please. Do we need to vote to do that, or is, no, okay.
Alright, any other amendments to the agenda? Okay, seeing none. Public comment, is there any public comment? Yeah, come on up.
Can I speak from here?
Sure.
Can I speak loudly?
Yeah,
Thank you.
let's just have that. And I always say this for every public comment, just for everyone watching, public comment, if we get asked questions, we don't answer questions, we're just here to hear information from people in the community. We give everyone 3 minutes, and so if we don't respond, we're not being rude, we are listening, so.
Thank you. The only thing I
Oh,
wanted
just
to...
name and.
Oh, sorry. My name is Lois Kilby-Chesley. I live on Runaround Pond Road. I just wanted to let you know there are no minutes posted from the select board since May 28th, which means both June meetings and both July meetings, the second of which I'm sure you're approving tonight. If I look? Yes, Rob. But there are no minutes from any of those meetings posted for the public to be able to review. Thank you.
Thank you, awesome. Any other public comment? Alright, seeing none, moving to old business, Heather, you have fee schedule?
So if you look in front of you, we have the fee schedule. I was tasked with going through and making sure that it aligned with what we had discussed in our meeting. There were a few edits that I had made to what the draft was. And I just wanted everyone to put their eyes on it to make sure that it accurately reflects what they believe we did in our meeting. And then we don't have to discuss it tonight because I know that we have a very full agenda. But the Eureka rental, the fees for renting the Eureka Center, I put it in a little table of what I was proposing. So if people want to look that over, if we want to put fee schedule on the next agenda to just put the stamp of approval on this
Yep.
part and then discuss if people want to break down Eureka the way that I have
Yeah,
proposed here.
awesome. Yeah, just so folks remember, we had set the fee schedule and made some edits to everything, and we realized that when we got the final copy, that there was just some, grammatical errors and a couple of nominal edits. It didn't change the structures of the fees or anything, we just need to clarify, so Heather went through and did all that, so, since we do have a full agenda, I don't wanna go through it right now, but probably put it on next meeting to just have everyone review it independently, confirm that it reflects what we were hoping. At the next meeting, we'll have a vote then to lock it in, so. And then we can talk a little bit more about the Eureka Center there, which is very full tonight, so.
Thank you.
I like this format of this.
Yeah, the format looks slick. Alrighty, that's old business. Maybe old business next meeting as well. Alright, new business, resource protection update from the select board from the town planner. So for everyone, remember, we had tasked the town, the planning board and the conservation commission with looking into providing, some, guidance with some changes that have been done in mapping at the state, and so we just having them come and report back on those recommendations today. And so Mr. Thabard is here to give us that report.
Actually, I'm here because,
sorry.
yes, yeah, for that issue, but the working group, the Planning Board and Conservation Commission formed a joint working group consisting of members of both groups. And they're looking for direction from the select board on one aspect of the project that we've been working on. As you know, we've been looking at the latest state data on beginning with habitat, natural resources that served as the basis for the rezoning that occurred, the zoning map in 2023. So the state has released new data that brings into question some of the data that was included in the comprehensive plan that is no longer accurate. So we've been looking at updating the resource protection district boundaries to reflect the latest state data. So that's moving forward and it's pretty straightforward. The other issue that came up during the public participation process leading up to those zoning map amendments was a concern that landowners had of having their buildings, existing buildings, placed into the resource protection district. And we looked at, and what was discussed was the potential for them to go to the Board of Appeals or to the Planning Board to do expansions of those structures. But when we began to look into making that process easier and less expensive, we discovered that the current regulations that are in effect for dealing with expansions of non-conforming uses may not be consistent with state law and may not be workable in terms of that potential problem. So, and that's obviously something we'll be looking at with codification. But in the meantime, those landowners are in a position where it may not even be possible for them to expand the non-conforming uses, and it is difficult. So we've been looking at options. Last summer we looked at facilitating the process, but that kind of fell apart on the basis of the concerns over the current regulations for expanding non-conforming uses. So we took a different approach to it, which was to look at pulling out those existing buildings out of the boundary of the district, and then they wouldn't have to go to a board. As we get into that process, last summer I presented a concept for that, of basically pulling any developed area of a lot out of the resource protection district. But then we got bogged down in how do you objectively define, is it 20 acres of field? Is it just the area around the house? What if the woods come up to the house? So the planning board pretty much said this isn't going to work for this year. So I went back to the drawing board and looked into the comprehensive plan for an objective basis. And what I found was in the beginning with habitat data, that presented a developed area map that's 250 feet from any existing road or existing building. So that provided an objective basis for determining, defining what the developed areas on lots were, and it tied into the comprehensive plan. So I presented that to the joint working group, showing what the effects of that would be, and I did include in your packet a map showing how much of the resource protection district would be affected by that, but I also gave them a couple of other options. Those were to only go 250 feet from the existing buildings, which was what precipitated the investigation, and then showing another alternative of only 100 feet from those existing buildings, which would give room for expansion. So the working group is pretty much comfortable with continuing to bring options 2 and 3, the 250-foot development buffer or the 100-foot development buffer around those homes and buildings. But they felt a little bit uncomfortable with the concept of having a much broader removal of all developed areas on the beginning with habitat maps from the resource protection. And they felt that that really went beyond their charge from the select board. So they asked me to come and just kind of present that to you and get your direction on whether you feel that the larger approach of removing everything that's within a developed area as defined by inland fisheries and wildlife should be presented to the public in the public participation process this fall, or should it just be limited to the original direction requested by the select board, which is to give relief to those affected property owners with buildings that are now non-conforming because of resource protection.
Does anyone have any questions for George? I have comments and questions, but I can hold off to other people to go first. Josh, your head, okay?
Yes,
No?
always. Can you elaborate, and if you can't, that's totally fine, on where state law is not aligning with the expansion of non-conforming uses?
Yeah, in you know, I went to an MMA conference, and some of the planning board members have been there as well, and they do this every year for training and updating purposes. And in this last round, we talked about the non-conforming uses. And generally, from the zoning standpoint, whenever something is non-conforming, the intent is that over time, that non-conforming use will no longer, it'll phase out. And so generally, Maine law in terms of dealing with non-conforming uses is very strict. And the allowances that are granted in the ordinance are constrained by, you have to prove undue hardship, you have to prove 4 criteria like that the property cannot yield a reasonable return unless a variance is granted. So Durham has, and many other communities have done this, tried to provide flexibility outside of those parameters, but the particular wording of it, unfortunately, much of the ordinances, as we've discussed in the past, was just copied and pasted from other ordinances by people that didn't really understand fully all of the working parts and the laws behind them. So I think the drafting currently is very questionable and frankly doesn't make much sense, because the planning board can allow expansions of up to 30% of the existing structure if it meets these certain criteria for conditional use. You can't cause drainage problems, traffic problems. You know, in most cases, a single family expansion is not going to do that. But then it says if you want to go beyond 30%, you can go to the Board of Appeals, and there's no limitation on how big you can make it. And the only criteria are can't cause problems for groundwater. So it just doesn't make sense that the planning board's smaller expansion would be more restrictive than the Board of Appeals' larger expansion. That doesn't make any sense. So there's some fundamental issues within the non-conforming expansions that really need to be looked at, and we will be doing that during codification.
Yeah, and from my understanding from this MMA conference, they're saying that generally you try to avoid creating non-conforming structures or non-conforming things within your ordinance. So we would want, since we did do that, we'd want to address how to move forward in kind of a more known approach rather than necessarily a case by case at the appeals or whatever. Because what you're saying is the 30% expansion is allowed within state law, but then if someone challenges that and wants to go more, the appeals board can.
Well, it's questionable whether or not your planning board can approve expansion of a non-conforming use in that way.
Mhm.
I think that's questionable.
And
The
so
Board of Appeals generally are authorized to give variances from the requirements of the ordinance. This ordinance gives the planning board that authority. So that's what we need to look at with the town attorney and just try to sort through, and we will be doing that as part of the codification. But this is a simpler approach, which just basically takes those buildings, stops them from being non-conforming uses, gets them out of the resource protection district, and really, there's no logical, scientific, you know, we're talking about basing it on science, there's no basis for putting those buildings into resource protection in the first place. There's no resource to be protected.
Are
So,
these the buildings, I mean, this.
yeah, one of
side
those
the
data
buildings
shows
restricted
the
from
first
expansion?
review that I did, I identified about 36 buildings. Since then, I've been doing additional searching for any buildings in resource protection, and I've come up with about 56 or so. And of those, 18 are in the beginning of Habitat 6+. Those will automatically come out. So now what we're looking for is granting relief to other people who have their buildings in resource protection.
I had a comment first, Heather, if you don't, maybe I'll let you go ahead.
When you do
I have
that,
I have a string of comments, so I don't wanna.
yeah, you make me lose my train of thought when you do that. Okay, so, this is directly related to what you just said. So 56 identified, 18 are in the 16 plus. It's 6+, sorry. It's my understanding that there has been review, I think this is what you just said, of individual properties.
Yes.
And is that being done with the task force? Are they looking at the individual properties
Yes.
and what an appropriate
Yes.
measure would be? And how many of those have been completed or reviewed or looked at?
Well, I've been going through, first what we're trying to do is define what principles are we going to follow. So I've given them about 24 different examples and situations, and we were exploring how to calibrate this. And, you know, like as I said, option 2 is 250 feet from the existing buildings, option 3 is 100 feet. What does that look like? One of the concerns that the working group had was, okay, it's one thing if it's floodplain and the people want to take the risk, you know, they'll have to meet the floodplain regulations, but does it need to be resource protection? But they saw a difference between that and a stream buffer, for example, or a waterfowl wading bird habitat. So they wanted a differentiation between those areas that are environmentally sensitive and those areas like forested wetland or floodplain where people pretty much, they're gonna have to live with the consequences of their decisions. So that's the kind of calibration that we've been doing. By the time it's all said and done, we will look at every single property in detail before it goes forward.
Okay, so my follow-up to what he just said is that my concern with talking about a blanket 250 foot or 100 foot is that there are differences that are specific to each of the properties that have been put into protection. And so I know that we'll have this discussion further, but my concerns are around a blanket in talking about the properties versus making decisions based on the individual properties themselves.
Yeah, I would be more inclined with looking at a blanket if it was a lot more properties, but since it sounds like there's 30 that are non-conforming and that they're partway through addressing them already, I think it gives the opportunity to take a look. I watched the meeting where they were talking about this a little bit, and the example that they were using is if you have a structure that's within a wetland complex that is now protected, maybe the expansion should be allowed more towards the front of the building because it's further away from the resource as opposed to equal expansion in every direction, knowing that you might get closer to a resource. So I think that adds in some directional restrictions that make sense to me. The other thing I was going to say is I would just, to keep this moving forward, sounds like option 1 is named on the table, which I agree with, that's well outside of our purview to the committee. You know, when you look at option 1, and I bring this up because I think it's a point out for caution here, the idea that if something is within a developed buffer, that it is developed or that should not receive resource protection is inaccurate. We only have a portion of the legend here on the undeveloped map block, but that buffer is just within 250 feet of a developed area. So let's take Swamp Road, for example. There's 250 foot on either side of Swamp Road that falls within the developed buffer. But the vast majority of Swamp Road, as you're driving along it, on either side of you is just complete intact forest. And so when I look at this map here that shows taking all these red areas out because they are within a developed buffer, that this proposal includes taking out massive amounts of streams that are protected through stream buffering, which would not make any sense at all. And if you look at the buffer with the undeveloped habitat area, there's also these arrows that are colors that are showing you areas within that undeveloped block and that can be connected because there are intact forests there. So it's not saying that this buffered area means that there's there's complete development there. It's just saying that that's buffered from the resource. So I don't think that that is a good basis for removing any resource protection and it's far outside the scope. So I think that it's pertinent to remove that from the plan because it's not something that I would support if it came to us. I personally like the one-by-one approach where you're looking at each individual resource because it's giving it a fine-tune. If you're coming to us with those recommendations, which I think is an option, we're going to want to see the work on that as to where that came from, not just we decided this person can go east and this person can go west, but this person can go south. We're going to want to see some of the work on those. So I would just encourage that if that's the approach you want to take, to bring that to us. So, Josh?
I was just gonna say, I think we're getting into the weeds here. I think what George was coming to was asking, can we expand our objective to look at these things, right? Not for us to debate them tonight.
The question from the group was, should option 1 be put out to the public for discussion and presentation, which is that large, as you just described,
Yeah.
treatment of everything within what has been defined as a developed area.
Or within the buffer.
Yeah, so if we don't include that, then we can move forward with the.
Yeah, and the only reason I went into detail there is just to provide some clarity on the intent behind that. And so I know that you're gonna have to consider ways that you want to evaluate going forward, and just take that piece of information in mind regarding the buffer. That it's just a buffer, it does not mean that the woods along Swan Road is developed.
I think that it's important for us to seek a legal opinion on whether or not this can be done without having to go to spend the town resources and taxpayer money to put this before the entire town for 30 individual properties. I would like to seek a legal opinion on whether or not a variance being granted, property by property, can deal with this if it went before the Board of Appeals. I know that in our ordinance, which way back when, you had outlined the ways in the ordinance where property owners can have relief. One of the ways was to go before the Board of Appeals, and that is an action that can be initiated by a review, correct, of the ordinance or an interpretation of the ordinance by the select board. So I would like to know if we have the authority or the ability to seek an interpretation, if the Board of Appeals would be able to grant a variance, or like we just did with that at the last meeting for that property that's on Swamp Road, we issued a no action letter. Based on the data that's specific to to the property, versus going down this road of putting 30 property owners in front of the entire town to vote on. Does that make sense to people?
If I understand what you're asking, is there a legal opportunity for the board to just adopt a change to the zone around those houses without going to the town for approval?
I don't think that we have that ability,
or do a
because a
blanket-
zoning change has to go before the town for
Right,
approval.
that's my understanding.
But I believe that we can request that the planning board review the properties and grant variances. But I guess what we need to know is, do the property owners have to put in an application to the appeals for it to be looked at, or can we initiate that process for those property owners?
I wanna get your input on that, George, if you have input, or if we need to point us to who, but one thing I do wanna say there's, where I see the challenge is that if we were to say, here's a blanket, no action, within this delineated zone around that house, that just seems tough to me, because that building would still be non-compliant, and by giving you no action, we're acknowledging you are non-compliant, but we're not going to enforce a rule, because we want you to have relief. That doesn't fix the issue of us having non-compliant.
So maybe a
Structures.
variance is, a no action is not a great example, and a variance is a
No
better.
action would not apply.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying. What about my
Well,
the
okay,
variance
so back to
route.
it, people were complaining during the public process of having to go to wards. So, because of cost, delays in projects,
Time,
all those
yeah.
things. And, back in June, all the groups met together, and this was the direction given to the Resource Protection Working Group, Planning Board and Conservation Commission. So, if you were to change that direction, then I think that'd be important to get their input on whether they want to go in that direction.
So I feel like that was a miscommunication, personally, and maybe that was a misunderstanding on my part. When I think that this board was asking the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board to address the resource protection updating that needed to happen. My
Based off of the
understanding
changes
was
from
that
the-
it was based off the data that had changed from the beginning with Habitat Map, not to me, these are two completely separate situations. I
And they're
don't,
treating them as two separate
Yeah,
things.
yeah, I'm confused as to why the option in front of us here is to address those 30 non-compliant structures. 'Cause I don't remember our board giving that direction to the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board. I remember us asking for them to specifically address the area around the turtle occurrence, knowing that there was a change in the map. So I thought that was the only direction we had there. And so when this came out here, I thought, oh, maybe that's some initiative being taken or something like that, but I didn't see that in our notes or anything on that session, so I was just wondering.
It was in the report outline that I had provided to the select board as well as it's going into that meeting. So it was on the table, whether you made a specific decision or not on it, that's a good question.
I don't recall us, I recall it being in the report as something that to consider, but I'm with you, I recall us only asking them to address around the turtle. But we're here, and so,
I don't wanna say the turtle is
Well,
what
the
we
6+
specifically know
co-occurrence,
that the
yeah,
data has changed on that. There are other updates, and based on my understanding, that have changed because of that, so I think we should refer to it as the 6+ co-occurrence and not specifically the turtle. I feel like that is what this board's direction was, and I do wish that we would make that very clear here, and so that town staff knows and the task force knows. And then separately from that, my question still stands is whether or not this board would like to give initiative to seek a legal opinion on how we can remedy the 30 properties without a zoning change to those 30 properties. And I believe a variance is the way that happens, and I'm interested to find out if that's the case.
I just don't see how we can do that without a town vote, because it's editing a zoning map.
The Board of Appeals has the authority to grant a variance, correct?
Yes.
But that's still saying that you're getting a variance because we're acknowledging you're non-compliant, right?
This is why I want to
And so
lawyer.
that's where I'm
Look
thinking,
at
what
it.
you're saying, George, is that if we go the route of just trying to remove the non-compliance in its entirety, we get rid of that, and we don't have to go through. And your option is, can we just ask the Board of Appeals to examine, or us examine, all 30 properties and give a variance in one fell swoop?
A variance based on the criteria.
No, you can only give a variance for one individual property that's the subject of the appeal. You can't grant mass.
And so to your point, to Heather's question, I think she's saying, can we initiate the appeal on all 30 properties?
I
Or
don't
does that
think
have to come from the,
I don't think so.
okay, because I understand what you're trying to get to, is if we can avoid having to go through, make a lot of people go through a long process, that's the goal.
I don't want to put 30 property owners before the town to make this decision. That's what I don't want to do.
Well, they will always have a fallback of applying for a variance if it doesn't work.
Can we go back to what's before us? We're putting the cart before the horse. I think we have to tell these people, yes, you can look at this issue, and then when they make a decision, then we can not have this conversation. But without a presentation as to what the recommendations are and why, and then our discussion about that and seeing all the data, I think this is a premature conversation. So I would go back and again ask that we address the issue of, do we want the working group to look at these different options or not?
Yeah, and so in that regard, I'm saying option 1 should be taken off the table, and we should say, I'm okay with them exploring this, even though it wasn't part of the initial charge. And so if they wanna come back and make a presentation on what they think should be the best path forward for those 30 properties, I'm welcome to empowering them to do that.
I mean, I personally wouldn't take any, I agree, I don't like option 1, but I would leave them all on the table. But I would agree with that because I think that's the appropriate time for us to ask for a legal opinion. So I guess if we need a motion, I would make that motion that we advise the working group that they have our permission to explore options. If you want to limit it to 2 and 3, that's fine.
Yeah, I would limit it to 2 and 4, because that's the one where they go in the individual.
2, 3, and 4.
Well, it's 2 and 3, 4 is what they've been calling for, just keep it simple. There's gonna be 2 options, and each one of them will be going through a refinement along those lines, so.
So I thought option 2 was 250, option 3 was 100.
Yes, they were, but
and then-
within those areas, we will then be doing calibration
Okay, yeah.
on not going closer to the some environmentally sensitive resource, so that's just a refinement, it's not a completely separate option.
So we have a motion to have the task force to continue forward on these 30 property evaluations, exploring options 2 and 3. Do we have a second? I'll second it. All right, so discussion.
Can I just clarify one more?
Yep.
We've identified to date about 56 properties. I'm still looking to see if there are more. About 18 of those are coming out within the beginning of Habitat 6+, so it would be better not to state a certain
Sorry,
amount
yeah.
of houses, because there may be.
My motion didn't say, it just lets you explore the options.
Yeah,
We'll call them 2 and 3 and whatever
Yep.
sub-option there is.
and so in terms of discussion, the reason I am encouraging the motion that just limits it to option 2 and 3 is because, like I stated, about what I consider a misinterpretation on the undeveloped habitat block and what that means. And that motion, what I'm looking at right here, pulls a lot of resource protection out that is protected from other things like stream buffers, wetland complexes and stuff like that. So that would be then editing other criteria that already receives resource protection. I don't think it's appropriate to do it in this manner. That's where my discussion point comes in. So, do we have any other discussion on it? I think to Josh's point, this still gives us the opportunity to, after we get some recommendations from them, to pursue either asking for legal counsel or something like that to say, is there a way to do this without going through a change of the ordinance? If we can do that through a variance, and then we can vote on it. And so maybe we can get that information next from our lawyer. Just make sure we know all options are on the table, and then once we have their information and have those options, we can figure out the best way to move forward. So,
Do we get the opinion from legal back before any public hearing
I think it would be
and
worth
like
just to
that
ask
type of
legal
stuff
ASAP.
happens? Yeah, that, I
So-
mean, that's what I'm asking
yeah, I
for.
think it's a good thing, but we don't wanna tell them, wait on doing your work until we hear back from legal. Like
No, no,
Chris
I'm
said,
not
that's
saying
Josh
that.
said, we're not, that's putting the cart before the horse a little bit, so.
I think we go with here's option A, that's being recommended by the working group. Are there any issues with this? If there are, do these other options address it, or how can we address it? Because otherwise, I think if we come back and they say, yeah, that you can't do this, then we have to go back, figure out another one, and then maybe ask for more. I'd rather ask it all at once and get it done at one time. That's my feeling.
What I wanna make sure we have the answer before we go start holding public hearings on what people feel about these things.
They're gonna present to us,
Okay.
and then we're gonna have a discussion, and then, I mean, my assumption is if there's a question about the legality of something that we wanna vote on, we'll ask for it before we move forward.
Okay,
I think that keeps everyone's options on the table while still empowering them to work on, have direction to work on this, so.
George, I'm not trying to split, we're gonna vote first.
Yeah.
And then I just wanna make sure that, I would just like for George to say what he understands
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
outcome
okay.
of this. I'm not
Yeah,
trying to
vote
be
before
like
we
that,
ask
but
him
I
if
just wanna make
We
sure,
have to vote before we
okay?
ask him if he understands that, so vote. All in favor of the motion
Wait, hold on, 2, 3,
to explore options 2 and 3?
and then the individual assessment takes
That's-
place
that's
based on the
doing
2 and
both
3.
with
Got
it.
it, I'm just
Yeah.
making sure I understand what I'm voting on,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, all in favor?
Any opposition? Perfect, alright, George, do you understand that?
I heard a couple of things, and make sure I've got them all. Okay, first is draw option 1. You do not feel that that's beyond the scope of the original charge. And then secondly, you want to explore at some point in the process, perhaps before going to the public hearing, getting some indication from legal counsel on whether the variance option is viable under the current ordinance. And then you can make the political decision whether you want to put people through that or not, that's a separate issue. And then the third thing was just to move forward with options 2 and 3 with the detailed analysis of the individual properties.
Yeah, I think once we have that analysis, the mechanism of it getting put in front of voters or put in front of boards can be figured out, but we're gonna need that information anyway, Josh's point, so.
Yep.
And then we'll probably just want to update more frequently as the, progress is being made on those, so as soon as you get through figuring out the process, just so we're on
Yeah,
the same
and just so
page.
the intent on all of these different projects with the ordinances, what we're planning on doing is by the end of by Labor Day, pretty much wrapping up the work of the groups and then coming back to the select board, and presenting the preliminary findings, and then get your endorsement to move forward with all the process on what they are proposing, like this one. we're game because we need the direction, at this point, before we move any further.
Yeah. And my only other point there is we're gonna wanna see the justification as to why it works, so just be prepared with that. I know you were all gonna have a process, but we wanna see it as well before we move forward, so we understand it, so. Any other questions on the resource protection updates? So that was just on that update was only on the stuff moving forward. We didn't talk about the changes around the 6+ co-occurrence. Were you planning on trying an update for that today? Okay. Perfect. Alright, that's new business. Manager, meeting's not done.
George, this is a good package.
George is getting pretty sad with his GIS resources.
So, what you're getting right now, I know you all wanted to keep going with these push notifications, so let's do more research. These are pretty much your two premier companies that do it. I just want to go over the differences between them and tell you what my recommendation is, okay? So, GoGov. So GoGov is $3,900 a year to use push notifications, okay? Then they will prorate the remaining year if we can start it right now, and then it'll be $3,900 a year. And they do all of the, training and that sort of thing, okay? TextMyGov is $4,000 a year, so it's $100 difference. If we get going now, they won't charge us for the remaining year. But, if we sign, it's a 2-year contract where these are annual, okay? So the big difference here is GoGov, you have to go to the App Store and download the Town of Durham app, okay? TextMyGov, what they do is they go to the post office, get the cell phone that's associated with every address in Durham, and they will mass text everybody with a cell phone asking them if they want to receive notifications from the town of Durham. So they can either say no or yes, okay? So some people may not like that. So it's, the company doesn't have an issue with it. My concern is how many people are actually gonna go to the App Store and download the app. Like, how many of you have got the Casala app on your phone? Exactly, 2 out of, right, so if they do, so personally, I like the idea that they get a choice. They're gonna get a text message saying, do you wanna receive, text messages or notifications from the town of Durham? They can opt in or opt out. If they opt out, they'll never get a text message again. Get notifications.
So quick question then, Jerry, so with the TextMyGov, that means that the push notifications just come through as text,
Yes.
whereas with GoGov, does that come through as an app notification?
No, it's still,
So it's functionally interfaces the same way after
right,
it's time.
but you gotta go get the app to go down, turn on the notification.
More steps.
Right.
I think downloading the app is, might be less successful.
Well, if we had to download the app, I was saying I would sit at I volunteered for this, I would sit at the polling station all day and help anyone download it, but it's a long day. Have it?
I think that if we went with TextMyGov, that we would need to do some PR out ahead of time, because I think when people initially get that first text, they're gonna think it's spam,
Right.
and they're not gonna do it.
Yeah.
It's
that's
got,
another
yeah,
concern.
so it'll take about 2 to 4 weeks to get this up and running, so I guess it's plenty of time to get the notification up there that you may receive.
And,
Hold on.
sorry, go ahead.
I don't know if you know this already, and if you don't know it, I would be interested in knowing if we have the ability to do a QR code with either one of them, so that when people are coming to register at the polls and stuff like that, that we have the QR code where we can, I need to know if there's a QR code associated with signing up
Okay.
for both of the services.
Right. I know there's a way to sign up if you're not a resident, which is what I would have to do. I would have to sign up. With text my gov, there's a number, you just let the town you want, you're signed up.
Yeah, to your point, Heather, I think that with GoGov, you can just have a QR code to bring you to the app store into an app, so you can do that. But that's for opting in. This would be to automatically connect with people, but is there an option to also sign up, let's say,
If people just delete it because
If
they
you
think
said
it's
no,
spam,
and then
but
they
then
said,
they
"Oh,
have
actually,
an
you want
opportunity to
that,"
learn about
yeah.
it later.
So, so I'm gonna recommend that text my gov where people that's my recommendation, just because I don't think a lot of people are gonna go to the app store and download the app. I mean, we just saw, we had 2 out of 15 did it. So if you wanna reach more people, this is the way to go. If you wanna depend on people to sign up, this is the way to go.
Josh, did you want to say something?
I do have a question. The Text My Gov is limited to the package that's presented to 50,000 text messages per year.
Yep.
That's what, if half the citizens have it, that's 25 text messages.
Citizens don't get the text, they're just getting the notifications from the town. So it'd be 50,000 texts from the town going out.
So it's not 50,000 recipients, it's 50,000
Right.
instances of
Okay.
So that's my question.
And I don't see, I
Good
don't see
question,
the town
Josh.
sending out 50,000 texts.
Yeah.
It's not a two-way.
Hopefully not.
Jessica might get bored when she hears that.
That's what she doesn't hurt, like,
So that's why I'm recommending this, because I think more people will accept
Sorry, you said it and I wasn't writing. Text My Gov doesn't charge us for the rest of the year,
no, they will not charge us for this.
and then we can sign a contract or we sign a 2-year contract and they just don't charge us.
For the remaining year, and then we're gonna be locked in for 2 years.
I wish they would let us have a trial period,
Yes.
but
But they have to build.
yeah, I get it. Okay.
Jerry, what does it mean when it says allow citizens to ask questions and get immediate responses?
Well, that's,
Does
if
the
you,
tool, like,
that's
have
something that we can turn on, they do offer the two-way text message.
But you're in control of that.
Well, yes, we can turn that on if we choose to go that way, I would highly recommend that we go.
Yes, correct.
no, don't want to invest for it.
So with like this engage thing, this is, someone could have sent a message about the light on the curb on Millbrook Road,
Right,
instead of posting it.
right.
I mean, I think the last couple of meetings have talked about how we think it's very valuable to do this. And so I'm supportive. I think that when you're contacted and you are automatically getting opted into it or you automatically get to respond is important. I think we wanna find out details like, after the first round, do we see how many people accepted to opt in? And do we follow up 6 months later with another round of
Opting in.
opt in?
Oh, I'm sure
You
they
have
have.
it, yeah,
They'll
those
go
sorts
right
of
to it.
things.
Absolutely.
I think there's also some serious PR that needs to happen on our end to make sure everyone knows that it's not spam, it's not us tracking your location, it's not anything like that, it's simply just a way to send, right? It's simply a way for us to send information out, so a modern version of a town crier, so.
And both companies are helping with that marketing as well.
Well, do we have a motion from anyone?
I move that we, allow the town manager to sign the contract with Text My Gov.
Second.
Any other discussion?
And just the $100 cost, I think, is you take 13 years, right, to get it paid back, so I think, the $100 cost doesn't bother me.
Nominal difference,
I think there's some protocol that we should discuss about who's sending messages.
yeah.
We have a similar thing here where I work, which is 4,000 people, and every message comes from the president of the company, even though we know there's some ghostwriters behind him. But, and then, what actually is being sent over the text. And I should talk to others together.
Yeah, I think we can build that out once we get this. Good point though.
I think it's an excellent point.
Every message from Jerry.
I think it's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Do you have another comment?
Just if you can find out about the QR code.
Yeah, that's
Thank
cool. That's cool.
And what Debbie just said would go back to the communication policy, which
Yeah.
hopefully
Right.
is one of those things that we will get to one of these days.
Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none? Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, a couple other things, I'll try to keep it short and sweet. Our financial advisor and myself looked at a new financial suite today, like we possibly replace Trio. I will, be coming to you with more information on that, possibly talk about it at next meeting when Mark is here. So just, that's more, just being aware of that. Another thing, we've had an issue with our server is like full, and, we've had some computer issues, syncing stuff, and that sort of thing, so our IT and finance come in, they've actually installed an external hard drive, and they're trying to work that out. They may be coming to us with a proposal to fix this problem, but it's just, we have no space on the server. So, I'll
Is
keep you
there, are you
posted on
lacking
that.
space or is there something broken with this?
No, it's not broken, it's just a lot of things get put on that server,
Yeah.
you know, for better or for worse, so it just really bogged down that system, and there was some issues. So we're working on that, just be aware of that.
Is it time for archiving?
Well, that's what
That
they're
was
trying
what
to
I
do,
was gonna
I mean, I think every time you open a document, it saves it to it, and I'll get more information, 'cause
Yeah.
they're still trying to work that out.
And I think one thing too, but also, as you know, to keep in mind is whatever retention protocols for, government documents, cause like,
Right.
I can't delete anything at work.
Right.
But we can go through and have someone write a program to delete duplicates. If you have PDF and a Word document, you can cut those in half with the ones.
Yeah.
So,
Other than that, I will be at the Main Town City Managers Conference tomorrow, Thursday, and half day Friday, so I'll be attending that. And the only other thing that I just want to mention is we had a Homeland Security audit on the safety on our buildings. And one thing that they mentioned is that we should put what they call ballards or in front of town office, to protect people from,
Driving.
so that kind of happened this week. So the chief was in my office, sitting at the window. A gentleman got in his car, his foot got stuck on the gas. He started heading towards the town office. The chief was yelling at me to get out of the way. Here he comes, and I didn't know what he was talking about. Well, sure enough, he curved and he went right between the building and the flagpole. Circled out around the lawn and then went parked. So we may want to look at putting something there, so we're gonna have our parking arrangements the way it is.
did you deny a traffic tag or something?
We may want to look at doing that, because it was recommended, and sure enough. And this actually happened in the town of Chelsea. Same thing, where that parking was, someone got in their car, something happened, and they actually went into the building and did a lot of damage.
We're happy you're alright,
So, yeah, well, thank you, I appreciate it.
avoided that.
So, other than that, that's pretty much all I have for you tonight. So,
Alrighty, board member reports. I don't have anything. Josh, do you have anything? Nope. Joe is excused, and Heather, do you have anything?
I have a lot.
Okay.
I'll be
well,
very
you have
quick.
a lot. Deb, do you
Yeah,
have
go.
anything first?
Just that we're working on the law enforcement fact paper, or whatever you want to call it, discussion white paper. So I sent you all a copy of what I'm thinking about needs to be on there. If you could just take a look at it and give me some feedback. I'm gonna meet with Ryan McGee, go over some stuff with him and rewatch the video. So at our next meeting, we're gonna go through it. Yeah, be ready.
Awesome, thanks, Deb. Heather?
First, I wanted to say thank you, Jerry, for getting the text turnaround back to us really quickly. Second, some of the things that I was tasked with at our last meeting were to schedule the school for the law enforcement public hearing, which I have done. We said that our business meeting would start at 5:30 and the law enforcement portion of it would start at 6 o'clock. So we have the school from 5 o'clock so that if we need to set up on. And then what I was talking with Jessica about this week was whether or not we were gonna do the Facebook invite, remember we were trying to figure out, and we can do a Facebook invite from the town page. Do we want it to read that our start at 5:30, our business meeting will be at 5:30, and then the law enforcement portion will start at 6? I feel like if it needs to be detailed out that way so that people know and expect that we're gonna be having our business meeting,
Before, yeah.
and then either they choose or, whatever, but they just thought if we posted at 6 o'clock and people show up and we're in the middle of stuff. Anyways, I didn't wanna make that executive decision.
No, I think it's a good idea to break that up so people know.
Okay.
What's the date of that again? Is that the next
September
August?
10th.
Yeah. Yeah, so it won't be here.
Okay, September 10th,
Yep.
5:30 at the school, and we have the school from 5 o'clock on.
Okay.
Okay. In the cafeteria. I contacted Roberta. That was one of the things that I was tasked with.
It's aging.
Yes, and I'll forward you what her response was. She sent some information that she gathered from another town, and she's more than happy to come in and speak with us whenever we want to put her on the agenda about the aging, not aging in place, but essentially the aging in place, the vulnerable citizens. I had two things that were brought to my attention from residents this week. One is the new website and the fact that there's no search function. And I personally am also finding that challenging when I'm trying to go back and look for information when I'm working on. Anyways, I don't know what the options are around a search function on the website, but I do find that hard to navigate, especially given the fact that it's new. And we only have those 5 tabs, I think, across the top. I have seen some public comment on they wanted to go online and pay their bill or register their car. It was register their car. And that lives under bill pay. Anyways, I just think the search function is essential.
Okay, so the search function is just a Google search. So if you search something, remember how the land use thing was coming up, it wasn't the recent one? You may get that. It may not even, if it's not updated, you may not even get the right document like you have.
But they can't embed a search bar into the website.
It's just a plain Google search.
Wow.
Now, did they provide any insight onto how to optimize that so you Google search town of Durham, Maine, colon, and then what you're looking for? Because sometimes you can, do they have any feedback on that?
I can ask them.
Yeah.
When we ask them what to search, they said, it's just a Google search. We can do it.
Well, people feel like they need to search, it means that the way it's structured isn't intuitive, in all cases what people are finding. Maybe we could put a frequently asked questions link, how do I pay my bill or whatever, and
That's a good
kind
idea.
of guide some people there, because it is a little frustrating if you
Yeah, I guess they,
Anytime you switch.
start new.
change,
Yes, I agree with
For
that.
sure.
I agree. I've found myself this week having to ask town staff for information that I would have normally been able to locate through a search function on the old website. And I'm not advocating to change. I do like the new website. I just am really struggling without the search function.
And feedback is good, and that's what we need,
yeah.
as long as it's constructive and not.
Yeah. The other thing I was gonna say is I wonder, now that we have more access and we can look at more of if we can examine or have the host examine what our most commonly used functions are. So if a registration of a vehicle is something that's getting used 2 or 3 times more than something else, maybe that warrants its own tab or own button on the home page, or paying tax bill or something. Just something to think about, but we're still growing with
Right.
this website, so there's a lot of opportunity. I think they're calling improvements with this website versus our old one. But I was looking at the search bar the other day too, so just figuring it out,
I mean, if you really want it, they'll do it, but just realize it's a Google search.
Yeah, I don't know if we have it now, but maybe in one of the town newsletters that come out, the weekly town blast, it could just say, how's the new website working for you? Provide comment here, and let's take some comments, so we just have a little process check in and look at what people are experiencing there.
Yeah,
So we want it to work with
Yeah.
folks.
So that might be something for us.
okay.
The last thing that I wanted to bring up was, the blinking light is being brought up again at Dead Man's Curve, as not functioning. And so I know I had brought this up a really long time ago about actually putting power to that versus having it rely on solar. And I would just like for that to get on a future agenda for us to discuss again, because I do keep seeing
It's
that.
just the one across Swamp Brook. The one you see coming up Millbrook Road is flashing, it's just that one.
Yeah, we can talk to DOT about
I think we are responsible. The last time, I think the outcome of the conversation was that we were responsible for that now, that after they finished, we accepted it.
but it's on the route, yeah, it's.
Yeah, I thought Calvin said DOT was responsible for it.
Anyway.
Let's just put it on a,
Anyway.
yeah.
I can look into it. But yeah, that's it.
I don't
And
trust
then I
that
had
way.
a
don't
question
trust
for
the way
you
anyway.
on an update. Did you reach out to solid waste?
Yeah, I reached out to the solid waste committee, chair, and have not heard back, so Jerry and I are talking about
Okay.
the next process on that.
Okay.
But there's no word there.
Okay, that's it. That's all I have.
Did Heather stuff jog any memories from anyone else before we leave board member reports? Somebody asked to jog my memory for that.
Yeah, we need to get moving on that, because people are starting to ask about
Yeah.
these new
Yeah.
canisters we're gonna get.
I will, Jerry and I talked about that briefly earlier today, about figuring out how to make the next steps, so I'm gonna try to get a contact again this week, and if we have to figure something else.
And I offer to help.
Yeah.
If
I'm
they
gonna
want,
write that.
if they want select board support.
Thanks, Deb.
And we're gonna turn it on here. Alright, nothing else, so just move to approve the consent agenda, we have our, meeting minutes from July 23rd, which are gonna be submitted. Any, motion on that?
Move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposition? Alrighty, and then we have our AP warrants, our upcoming meetings, our planning board meeting, September 4th, 2024, select board meeting, August 27th, 2024, and then, the fire station, and just noting for people, that's at 6:30, but the September 10th meeting is gonna, like Heather said, be at the Durham Community School, it starts at 5:30. Alrighty, so we're gonna move into our workshop on the, ordinance, so I think we shouldn't end the meeting, we should just move into the workshop portion, correct? Yeah, cool. So, just to lay out what our goal is here, is we're going to take a look, we have received copies already, but we're gonna, take a look at the, historic preservation, sorry, I gotta get the words right, someone help me with the.
Historic District Commission.
Historic District Commission. We're gonna look at the Historic District Commission's recommendations around, Article 12 and Article 15. We have Article 15 right here in front of us. And my goal tonight is to get some,
It's 5.1.
Sorry. 5.1, not 5.4, my bad. Yeah, let me get this. It's been a long meeting. Where am I at here?
You have this.
Oh, yours is in color. Mine's not in color.
Sorry, that's what it is. 5.14 and, yeah. I was missing my front page. In Article 12. And so my goal tonight is to hear from the Durham,
Is mine? Oh, I have it.
Historic District Commission.
Durham Historic District Commission, sorry. I just wanted to
Write your
say it
initial,
right.
write your.
I got it right here, I
Okay,
just wanted to
okay.
say it right. So, hear from the Durham Historic District Commission on their proposed changes on this and get some feedback. It gives us an opportunity to ask them questions on what they have proposed before we take a look at what we think the next step should be. And so tonight the goal is to just hear from them, and then after we end the question and answer period, we're going to then go into a discussion on what we think our next step should be. I just wanna focus on this at hand, not necessarily how we got to where we are or what's happened in the past, just looking now and moving forward. So, that being said, Lois, did you want to, we can move the table closer so you can
I can move.
chat, but we don't wanna make it a little worse for you. Thanks.
Do you wanna sit, right here?
Alright, now we all know you will hold microphone for us.
So I'm Lois Chase, and I'm Fondo, and I'm chair of the Durham Historic District Commission. I had no direction on what you wanted tonight. I had nothing prepared to say. I gave you Article 12, I gave you Article 5.14. I have no idea what you want from me. We were never given any direction.
Well, then, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is there are there any changes or anything different from what you recommended in these two documents that you wanna bring up tonight?
In the two documents, the changes that we had made from the originals, which are what the town passed, the changes are in red. The additions are in red, the deletions are in blue, and a couple of places they are purple. So yes, there are a lot of changes.
But nothing different than what's in these documents.
I just want to confirm that these are your all proposed changes.
Correct. The commission voted, the majority always leads us. This is what the commission voted on.
So, this is an opportunity for board members, and if you have questions, to raise your hand, to ask Lois any clarifying questions you have on the red or blue or sometimes purple changes we have here. The omission, the things that they want removed have a line drawn through them, the things that they want added have a line underneath them. And so I wanna make sure that we get a chance to ask you, any clarifying questions we have on these changes. So does anyone want to start, we can start with, Article 12 here. So, we'll just go right down it. So from the front here, it seems like the major changes are just, and I'm happy that doing this, because we've been doing this with ours as well. Removing the term selectmen or board of selectmen to go with select board. And then there's some removals in here as well. Does anyone have questions about what they're seeing here?
On B8 on page 3, are you still advising the town about the Union Church when we've transferred that? So, that's one thing I noticed.
But we took the vote to transfer Edinburgh.
Right.
Yeah,
So you don't, with the transfer, you don't need to do that now, right?
Correct. I mean, we still oversee it because it's in the
Because-
district,
Right.
but we wouldn't,
Advise us.
it's not the town, right?
So that would all be stricken.
I think that,
I assume, I agree that it goes without saying, that would be stricken.
Yes.
It's up there once.
the top of page 3,
yeah.
is about section 12.2,
And you said it was B?
number 8,
Sorry.
B8.
Yeah.
Pardon me, I thought you said B. Yeah.
And then, any other questions?
I have a process question.
Sure.
In the past, like when we did the shoreland zoning and those types of things, that information was sent to the state and reviewed for compliance. We're in the process of codification, and I'm curious if changes that were proposing to the ordinance for the next town meeting will be reviewed by those cross-referencing type resources.
Yeah, so the shoreline zoning stuff went to the state, because it was a state.
I was just using that as an
Yeah,
example.
but just for, in that example, that was because it was a state level regulation.
Mhm.
And so we were out of compliance with the state requirement, and so that's why the state there. My understanding was that this is our ordinance here, and so we would be functioning, developing this to serve for our town. And then we would obviously, I think moving forward, we're engaging legal counsel to figure out if we're ever proposing ordinances that are not legal for some other reason, because of the state level, regulation or something like that. So is that what you're asking, that we would still have this looked at by legal before any?
Either legal or the, I don't know if there's anywhere in state statute that addresses historic ordinances, but if there were, I would just wanna make sure that that cross-referencing is happening before we're putting changes out before the town to vote on them.
There's an organization in Augusta called the Maine Historic Preservation Commission. My experience, they're very helpful, but my experience in a question about ordinances, like if you just sent them a package of ordinances, they're going to say it's the town's responsibility.
Do you agree? Thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions here about, Article 12, or is there anything you wanna tell us about your proposed changes that you wanna highlight specifically? I know we have our edits in here, some of these being, grammatical edits, but more or less, is there anything in here that's a market policy change that you wanna share with us?
Okay, Josh has a question.
So,
Comment.
I don't know a tactful way to ask this question.
So don't be tactful, just ask it.
So one of the concerns I've had, or that has been expressed to me, and then when I think about it, it's like, yeah, that's a valid question. And what drew my mind to it is where you changed in 12.3, incorporating this to approval. What? And so, let me start. In 12.1A2, it says appointment shall be made on the basis of demonstrated interest. I think if you're applying, you demonstrated that interest, and I applaud you for that. And then ability, experience, and desire to promote historic preservation. What of those qualities makes this commission, what's the word? I can't think of it.
Why are we qualified?
Yeah, or well, how many, like, I'm thinking to myself, if you came to ask me, about paving, and I was on a board and I had to decide, make decisions about paving and stuff, I have no clue. And so my question, I guess, is what makes you qualified or competent, or whatever you want to phrase, to do that? And that's a question, and I,
So here would be my first answer, and that is, we heard that several times from the town planner in the past.
I'd like to not focus on the past and just
We
focus
were
on
not
the current.
qualified.
I mean, the question isn't whether people have questioned that before, the question is, can you please tell us the answer just to Josh's question now?
you want me to read?
We live in, no, okay. We live in a rural community. I think it's pretty indicative of the involvement of the community in various committees in town. We know that there are lots of committees in towns, that go unfilled for periods of time. You have people who are very interested in preserving the buildings that have historic value. You have someone who's a preservationist, Emily. You have someone who has worked in preservation in another city, Dave. Do I have qualifications? Only the fact that I'm absolutely adamant that we have to take care of this community and its historic value. Sandra, I am gonna include you in, are we qualified? we're interested. I think that's a huge piece of it. We look it up, right. Right, and we're both, three of us, and two other members, one of whom I will just point out is not here because she's exposed to COVID, and I appreciate the fact that she's not here. We also are involved in the Historical Society, pretty involved. All of us are leaders in one way or another of the society. So, we have a background in Durham's history, yes. And I'm not offended by you asking me that.
Oh, I know. I just wanted to clarify.
Qualified in a lot of things, but maybe not in historical things, other than the fact that I've been forced to learn it personally for the Western Methodist Church. I've learned a lot from Emily, from Dave, from our restoration guy.
Well, it's kind of a question.
So, we're asking questions to get directed towards the board, and if you're gonna ask a question, we just need you to identify yourself on the board, just for anyone who's listening.
And
Asking my question is workshop format. Like, what are the rules of workshop?
Yeah, so-
Because I am gonna want to interact with this.
Yeah, so the way we're gonna do it is, I'm gonna chair it like we are, and then if folks have questions, from the board, I'll direct the person from the board to ask the appropriate question to Lois, who's representing your organization. If she can't answer, it needs to get some input from the member, we would just ask that member to come up and on behalf, answer it, and just give us their name, and so people watching at home know. We know who everyone is here, we just wanna make sure that people can be identified like we do in our meetings.
so are you gonna allow the people in the audience to ask questions through the chair?
No, I'm saying if you
No.
don't have, if we have an answer, if you can't answer it, but you need to refer to someone from your board, we can address that person to answer that specific question. We're not having a public feedback, so.
That's not workshop.
Yeah, that's not workshop. Workshop is we're working together, our group with your group.
Yeah, this is how we're running it tonight. Yeah, so we're asking questions of the board to just provide us with some answers. And so then we're gonna have to move on from there as to how we want to move forward, because we just have to gather this information, so.
Okay.
Yeah. You had a question, Heather?
I had just a process question to
Yeah.
follow up to his question.
Sure.
Is Lois allowed to ask us questions?
Right now, I'm just going through and asking questions about the presentation, so
Okay.
not at the moment, we just wanna get the answers on their changes, like we do with other boards and commissions, when they have a proposed ordinance change, we ask them for questions, they didn't ask us questions, just like earlier tonight, no one from the Conservation Commission or the Planning Board were asked us questions, so it's more of just gathering information.
Okay.
Joe, I'm gonna have to go. I'm sorry, I was here because I thought this was a workshop, and I rearranged my whole business to be here tonight, to be supportive. And I trust Lois fully, she's extremely well informed.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, I'm a little disappointed. I thought this was a workshop that was directly given. I didn't think it was just a report. We did that last time. That I rearranged
Last
my
time it
schedule to be
wasn't
here.
exactly like that either.
Right, well, but I was here last time
So,
also.
if you need to leave, that's your business, so you're fine to leave.
Sorry, Lois.
Sorry.
I have to go.
I didn't know this was the format.
So you did ask in the email, I said, that they were gonna be directed like this, when we said.
I asked whether or not you wanted me to take
Did you
the
ask
speaking order, and you said you would be in
And
charge.
I said I would be directing
Yes.
questions and stuff
But I
like
did
that,
not-
and we highlighted that the goal tonight was to.
I'm not
get
gonna argue
information.
with you about it.
That's why we're here, to just gather information on this.
I had no clue what this was gonna look like.
Okay, I'm sorry that you didn't know, that was not the, so, the questions, anyone else have questions on section 12 here?
I have a
About the
question
edits.
on 12.3 Lois, on the
Free.
certificates of approval.
Yes.
Is that actually a form somewhere in some paperwork that a person would fill out and come to your group?
So, yes, it would be a form that needed to be filled out now. The certificate of appropriateness, which it is now, when I went in May to the national affiliate meeting for historic preservation, they said get rid of the appropriateness word and put in approval. So I came back to the committee in June and asked them for approval to change the word to approval. And they agreed to that change. The National Affiliate Group word to be used. They also said that, excuse me, they also said that by using the word approval, at the beginning, someone fills out a form, it gets approved. When it's done, when whatever the change to the home is, let's say Union Church wants to put shutters on their, new shutters on their, Union Church, on the Historical Society's church. They would fill out the form, they would bring it would get looked at by codes, it would get looked at by our commission, it would get approved, let's assume, it would get reviewed at the end, and then the owner gets a certificate of approval saying, yes, you met the criteria. So National Affiliates thought that was the process to go. Is it too much? I can't say.
And so it sounds like that change to approval is just to be in line with what is done at a more national standard, or what the advisement is from a national organization.
Yes, an appropriate is an arbitrary word. And so what's appropriate to Heather might not be appropriate to me. If it's approved, we both approved it.
Yeah. And so when issuing certificates.
And you are where?
Sorry, I'm just still under 12.3.
Okay.
So when issuing certificates of approval, is there a written set of standards that an applicant knows that they need to meet in order to receive a letter of approval? And so the reason I ask is, in a lot of conversation we're having is we want everything to be fair and equitable, and we want the applicant to know these are standards that I need to meet so they can come prepared to meet that. And so, in that example, are there a written set of approval criteria?
No.
Okay.
Someone would say, on my home or on my building within the district, I want to put on cornices, new cornices. And they would describe what they want, and they would maybe have a photo or some sort of document that shows a visual. It would come to codes, it would come to the commission, codes would approve it, commission would approve it, and then we move on. It's because, as you were saying earlier, every building, every property is a little bit different. And so it's not, you must have, I don't know, 9/6 panes of windows. It's not that specific.
So is that the discretion of you, of your organization to say, we don't want to approve the color purple, but we would be okay with
We can't,
black, because,
we don't approve color.
but if they're, like, so if they're saying we wanna replace our shutters, but they're showing you that this is the color the shutter's gonna be, you would then only be saying, we're approving or not approving based off of the shape and look of the shutter, without the color of it being considered.
Correct.
So, like, if someone just wanted to paint the Union Church lime green, you couldn't say no to that.
In theory, correct.
Okay.
Discourage them from it.
Well, I know it seems like an absurd
I know,
example, but I'm
I
trying to
know.
understand, because if someone owns one of these buildings or wants to operate around one of those, and they go, I wanna do this, but I don't know what standards I have to meet at, whereas with other things we have, like, this is the standard that you have to set back or whatever, so I'm just trying to make sure I understand, but, Heather, you had another question?
Are you when you're saying you don't approve color, but material or something like that? I think those are the types of and I understand that they vary, right, from property to property or project to project. You're speaking of that from a place of knowing, that's not documented, that's not written anywhere. I think,
Without referencing the past, we have not made decisions about color.
What I'm trying to understand is, like, when we're trying to give approval for something, usually you know what standard you need to meet. So, like, I know that I'm speeding because there's a sign that says you can't go over 35. I don't get just pulled over and then someone says, we think this is too fast for you. And that's where I'm trying to understand. So it's like, if I want to replace a shutter, but I'm using aluminum.
Right,
And
and
it
so that's what I'm
I'm
asking.
just trying to figure that.
Right, I'm asking where the knowledge, or if it's in fact documented somewhere, that this, like, for subdivisions, it will say buffer. Maybe it's more specific now, I'm using this as an example. If it says buffer, and the buffer has to be evergreen trees, whatever, right?
I think-
Buffer is an in general term.
I think the standards you're looking for are the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Is that,
They're guidelines, they don't have to be followed, they're recommended guidelines. Those, in the bigger picture, the DOI's standards, Department of the Interior standards, are recommended guidelines. What we have in ours is if you go to, mine are not numbered, if you go to 12.4, standards of evaluation, you can see that all this blue stuff is all crossed out. Then you'll get to new D, which used to be F. And it says any structure or site in a historic district shall not be altered or said blah, 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 and it goes on from there. Those are the only guidelines there are. It has to do with, alterations, but alterations can be made to the rear of the building. So if, for instance, the Union Church, the Historical Society wanted to put a glass paneled addition on the back of the Union Church, that would be fine, because it's not visually impactful, because you don't see the back of the church.
unless you can see it from the road, right?
Yes, but it's assumed that the back of the building is, yes.
But if it's wider than the Union Church, you can see it.
Oh, if it was wider, yes.
Right, so there are
Yes.
some limitations.
Yes, there are.
I'm glad,
And then,
oh, sorry.
go ahead,
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but now you're in the section that I had my questions about.
yes. So then there's, new buildings, there's height, there's relationship of width and height and elevation, there's roof style, there's, width of the windows to the height of the building. There are some restrictions, because when you're talking about buildings before 1900, there are certain architectural expectations. Other towns include everything since 1975 in their historic buildings. In Durham, the district is made out of the buildings in the district, and we have all of them covered, some of which are perhaps, what do they call? I'll call it double wide. I'm not sure that's the appropriate word for it, but some of them are prefab buildings, some of them are churches, some of them are antiquities. So all the buildings in our district are considered.
Deb had a question, but I wanna make sure did you need to jump in before Josh continues this?
Yeah, absolutely, I apologize.
No, that's all right.
So if I'm affiliated to one of these properties, which I have a question on, I'm just gonna ask.
I'm sorry, I can't see what you.
One second, we're only talking about within
I
the
know,
district right now.
I know I'm
we
gonna
don't
ask
know,
my
so-
question, but, so if I wanna make a change to one of the places on the list, can I go to this document and read it and understand whether I have to put in an approval form?
I believe the list that you're looking at, I believe the list you're looking at are no, these are the buildings in town that, with two that are not anymore on the historic district, the National Historic Sites. 1355 and 1394 were both removed, which we didn't find out about until
Okay.
So
That's
we're
fine, later.
only talking about things within the
So
historic
those
district.
are not in the district, there are 3 buildings there that are in the district.
Gotcha.
Only those 3 are overseen
I see, okay.
by the commission.
Okay, I misunderstood all
Yep,
that, okay.
okay.
It's hard to see, but it's this SWB district overlay,
Yes.
only goes over
So
those
4,
ones.
9, and 10 have to
Those
comply.
4, 9, and 10 are the only ones that are subject to Article 12.
Oh, I
Because
see.
that's the historic district.
And every other building in the district.
Yeah, within that district, yeah, so.
So
and those are
every
the known
building in the
historic
district has been identified as needing to be overseen by the commission.
That,
Go ahead,
sorry,
I'm talking too much, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
so that includes like the get and go?
Nope, doesn't go that far down.
Oh, I thought it was a half a mile. If I did that.
So that 1,500, so this is, Josh, this is where it gets really messed up. So the 1,500 feet part, which is what I think you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Is around the buildings that are on the National Register.
Okay, so, okay,
But there are
But
homes in there that have been built in
so,
the year 2000, I might
Right.
be exaggerating, but yes, there are homes in the district that were built in.
Yeah. Just a quick point of clarification, so we're all on the same page. Right now, Article 12 is only talking about the historic district. So on that map, it's only the
Yeah.
area that's got that purple hatching. It's just hard to see because the red stars are superimposed on it. So this is only applying to the buildings within the historic district, and there happens to be building 4, 10, and 9, which are listed
But it
as
also,
historic buildings, but we're saying that the standards apply
to
to
every
everything
home
within that
in the
district.
district.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying where we're at, so everyone knows, so.
And
I understand.
And annually, or more than annually, we let the people know in the district that they are impacted by commission expectations, by this ordinance. We send them a letter, we actually have sent them 2 since October, so that they understand that they're impacted. Because what we don't want what we don't want to happen is we don't want it to be a surprise that someone decides that they're gonna put new shutters on their house and they're halfway through doing it. And surprise, surprise, you didn't follow the rules. We are trying to make sure that that doesn't happen.
So Josh, before you go ahead there, Josh, you were working on just a line of questioning around one section. I wanna make sure we get that question out, and then I wanna make sure you get the chance to speak to Heather, so.
I guess my question, this is something I should probably know, but since I don't, I'm just gonna ask it. Why does the commission have oversight over the neighboring properties if they're not historic?
Because sometime along in the past, which I'm not supposed to talk about, someone decided that all of the buildings in the district would be considered as important.
And I think that must have happened during the establishment of the district.
Which was when, do we know?
Let me think.
You don't think you can hang up that.
Maybe. No, I don't. I'm thinking it was 1994, but I'm not sure.
Do you know?
I think it was adopted in 2006.
Yeah.
So prior, go, sorry.
No, I can wait for mine.
You're good, Heather.
So prior to 2006, the historic district, as it exists now, did not exist.
Well, before the ordinance was adopted, whenever it was adopted, it was the historic district.
And then it was adopted during the comp plan review, during a comprehensive planning process, and then we've had 2 more, or several more since then, and it's still been in there.
I have more questions about this article, but you can go if you're.
I mean,
So, I have some questions as well, but I wanna make about this, section 12.4. Are we still on, is that what your questions pertain to?
mine's more of a general question.
Okay, sure.
Mine's a general question.
Alright, sure, we'll go to the general question.
I guess my question would be, not the work of the commission, but why is this district necessary? It sounds like the work could be done without the district, which is causing, in my eyes, I don't have an explanation as to why the neighboring buildings are included. And so, isn't there a way we could get rid of Article 12, and then we can talk about the changes should really be made in 5.14?
My
But-
question is a follow-up to that.
I mean, without getting rid of the commission, which I think that would do, as I'm talking, maybe. But other than that issue, because I don't wanna do that, and that, so take that out of the equation. But other than that, shouldn't the commission really be looking at what's in 5.14? Whatever that turns out to be, as it is, with your changes, with different changes?
Because I'm representing the commission, I'm not gonna give you my personal opinion on that answer, because I'm representing a group, and we haven't talked about that, so I don't have an answer that the group has come up with. What I could, but I'm not going to do, is give you my personal opinion, but because I'm representing a town group, I'm not gonna do that.
Let me rephrase the question.
Okay.
And I don't wanna get ahead of ourselves and have a discussion on what's in 5.14. But aren't these in 12.4 that we've been discussing? Really, isn't a better, that's all covered in the historic resources in 5.14, right? And that lays out essentially the same thing that, you know, it talks about demolition and removal of buildings, it's the first one I looked at. And so isn't that, if we have, if we made all of these changes, we're having it in two different places. Is that?
So are you asking me if it's repetitive?
That's probably a more artful way of asking. Yes, is it, or duplicative?
Some of it is. Because we actually, remember, we moved what's red. So we added in, without talking about 5.14 yet. What's in red on 5.14 is what we have newly put in. That's all new. We moved it from 12 to 5.14.
So Josh, is your question is essentially, why have 12 if everything's gonna be moved to 5.14?
I mean, from my review, everything except for the creation of the commission is already in 5.14. I'm looking, like 12.4, was it D 1 through 4, or 1 through 5? E 1 through 5, I think are the same as in 5.14 G 1 through 5. And so, you know, I don't wanna, to me, it makes us have the commission, the creation of the commission, and I guess this is probably better for later. But so you have a preview of my thoughts in case you have any comments on it, I wanna say it now. Aside from the creation of the Historic District Commission, or I hope you come up with a better name, like you talked about, it's all contained in 5.14, so why is it needed in Article 12?
So I am gonna give you my opinion. Because without offending anyone in the room, I have asked questions of employees of the district, employees of the town. And one of the answers that I've gotten repeatedly is, I don't have time, I'm too busy, I can't take that, I'm not gonna do that, I'm not gonna
That's what we're trying to
police."
address here in this setting, so that's why we're.
That's why I'm addressing it, yep. And if there's no time in an employee's day,
So I don't wanna get
To
into
double
discussing the
check.
town employees, we're here today to work on this solution
then
moving
I can't
forward.
answer the question.
That's what I'm just saying, I don't wanna bring personnel in or references to
I
personnel.
apologize for putting you in that position.
That's my, just for tonight, that's what I'm trying to make sure we're keeping complaint.
I understand, but I think I understand your.
Then I can't answer the question.
Understood, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to point out, I did check the record on when the ordinance was first enacted, and it was April 5th of 1994, you were correct.
Thank you.
Did the commission have a conversation around whether or not Article 12, aside from what Josh is saying, the information regarding the commission, right? Did you have a conversation around whether or not this article is necessary? What my concerns are, I believe, are what Josh's concerns are, and that's the fact that every property in the district is subject to the criteria laid out here, regardless of whether or not it's. I'm trying to figure out how the contributing resource was assessed.
So let me answer that first, if I might. We have had that discussion ad nauseum,
Okay,
because not everyone on the commission believes that every one of the buildings in the district is a contributing building. That perhaps we should be more choosy about which buildings we consider contributing and which we consider non-contributing. Because if indeed there's a modular home in the district, or a recently built, as you said, 2000 building, year 2000 building, is that a contributing resource? We talked about it and talked about it. We took a vote. The vote is that all the buildings in the district are contributing.
are you done?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't want to interrupt you. I think this goes back to having standards that define why something would be considered a contributing resource. And without those standards to define what makes it a contributing resource, that's the part of this that I'm struggling with.
And
You asked another piece, and I forgot it already.
I think I had asked about whether or not you had discussed
Oh,
if the article needed to.
of course. So, yes, we did, because at some time, there was, I'm trying not to. At some time, there was a recommendation from someone who has a stake in this, that Article 12 be removed, and we did discuss it a lot. This was 3 years ago. And we, as a group, decided that Article 12 was still important enough for us to keep it in the ordinances.
So my issue with 12 is that when people have to get a permit for something or have to get approval, I think that the only way to make that process equitable is so that people know what standards they're being judged against and have an idea. So, because then if there's a challenge to a disapproval, you can say, I feel I met the standards that were here. And in an effort to try to make sure that everyone can, at any given time, find what standards are and find how to follow them and make sure that they're putting their best effort forward, I want to see standards like that laid out. And so that's where I have a little bit of a hard time here, because someone should be able to know, I've met all the requirements for this shutter without having to say, I hope this works, and I hope the people who are reviewing it agree. And so that's where that's more of a phrase than a question. I'm just trying to kind of wrap my head around that, because I'm just trying to think of this equity component and making sure that everyone is on an equal playing field for evaluation. So, do you have a comment to my question, comment?
Yes.
Perfect.
I agree with what you're saying, and also what I just said about the contributing resource. I don't want to see the historic district, eliminated, because I think we do have a very, I have the book written by, Stackpole, like
The history of Durham.
yes, thank you. And there are maps in there, and it shows that this specific area has a lot of historic, integrity to Durham. And so I'm not in favor of the district going away, but I do have an issue with the fact that there's no definition of a contributing resource, and that there are properties within that district that are being held to a standard of historic preservation that, in my opinion, should not be. And so I think that what we're trying to do is get direction from us, the policymakers, right? The way that we were just directing
Yes.
prior. And so I think it's important for our board to establish whether or not we, as a board, feel that contributing resource needs to be clearly defined, and if so, that becomes part of this language, and if it does, that I don't know what the word is that I wanna say, not alleviates, but perhaps gives relief to the homes that are in the district that don't meet the criteria of a contributing resource.
So a piece of context here too, and hearing what you're saying there, is the comprehensive plan. And so the comp plan, which we know that our ordinances have to align to that is the design of it, says, under historic and archaeological policies, number 4, to update the town's ordinance to protect significant historical and archaeological resources in the community with recognition of the need for reasonable and flexible treatment of property owners. I think that's something that we're both talking about, the flexible treatment and reasonable for property owners. And then 4.1 says to amend the historic district ordinance to make it a historic protection ordinance that applies to all listed structures in Durham, both to the inside and outside of those current historic preservation districts. So that's saying that the recommendation from the comprehensive plan is to tie standards to listed buildings both inside and outside of the current district, as opposed to all of the buildings within the district. I think that's kind of what you're pointing at, is that trying to evaluate protecting the important buildings, but not necessarily saying that people who
Have buildings that you don't feel like meet the standards are having those restrictions. And so that's kind of the context of this that we need to keep in mind as we're working on development.
I think the other thing that we need to also keep in mind is that we keep talking about buildings and structures, but there's historic integrity to properties, or to locations, or to things that are not buildings and structures. And so,
So that's a challenge I find with 12 too, is because does that mean if I live within that district and I want to put up a swimming pool that does not meet the design of what would be used for swimming pools during the early 1900s, and I want to buy an inflatable blue swimming pool and put on my front lawn, does that need approval because it's affecting the look of the district?
well,
Apparently not, because someone put a swimming pool in, but the
I don't
fence
know about
around,
the swimming
but the
pool.
fence around it was a debate.
So, and that's where I don't know, does a chain link fence not meet the standards? Does it have to be a wooden picket fence that meets a certain standard? And those standards not being present makes it very hard for me, certainly being sympathetic to the buildings, but very hard for me when we know that there's a lot of those kind of questions out there. And that's where I'm trying to get some understanding.
May I ask a couple of questions myself now?
Sure.
Why are we only seeing one page of the comprehensive
I
plan?
just wanted this section that talks about the, this historic art and archaeological policies, because the plan itself is like a couple hundred pages.
No, this archaeological, the historical and archaeological part starts with number 1. We're starting here with number 4.
Yeah, this is just the one that I wanted to make sure we're keeping in frame of reference to see.
Okay, because it's not the whole, I just want everyone to realize
But
this is not all the direction that's given to the commission.
2 more pages.
Yeah, I understand, but this is talking about the goals for the town's ordinance,
Okay,
and that's why and we're talking tonight about the town ordinance, and so that's why I wanted to make sure that we just had this fresh in our mind as to what the comprehensive plan suggestion.
okay, and then my other question is, because I think the question of why is number 12, why is Article 12 important? I think that's important enough to hear other people on the commission. So if you don't mind, I would like to ask the 2 commissioners who are still here,
Yeah,
if
sure.
they want
If you wanna tell
to
us-
chime
if
in
you
rather
wanna
than
tell
be
us-
silent for going on 2-3 hours.
If you want to tell us, our goal is to understand why the commission made these changes in Article 12 and what their ideology is about it. So if you want to chime in to that effect, why you 12, number 12 is important. Just your name and where you live, and then
My name is Emma Alexander. I live on Hollow Road. Article 12 is important because it establishes that there is a district. I think some of your questions can't actually be answered by us because it was established in 1994 and we weren't around for it. So I do think that some of your questions are valid and we have also gone through them ourselves. So I think that it's important that these things are protected and not to put blame, but sometimes things fall through the cracks, and it's good to have a commission that has an eye on this and thinks and feels very passionate about these things. So.
did you have anything you wanted? Okay, perfect.
Okay,
Awesome.
I want to give you a chance.
So to kind of Josh's point, why is this important? Like you had suspected too, it established the commission, it establishes the district, and that's why this, we feel it's important. Yes, go ahead.
So my question, again, I'm trying to figure out how I feel about it within the neighborhood properties. It's a question I've had for a while. And so my feeling is why a district as opposed to a specific set of buildings? And is there pros and cons, or?
So I actually had one of your members reach out to me and ask which of the buildings in the district were built before 1900, which I think is a valid question, which I didn't bring the answer to. But I did provide that member with the answer. And there are, I think it was 11 of the buildings in the district that were built before 1900. The other ones were built, I don't know, I didn't have building dates because I used the survey that was begun several years ago with pictures and dates of all the buildings in town that were built before 1900, which the town planner has the copies, the original copies of. So your question is one that we have talked about. Why are the buildings that were built in 1995?
So, I mean, in 5.14, and again, I apologize for talking about stuff we're moving ahead, but it's just there. It talks about in F, any structure or site on the National Register of Historic Places were determined by the Maine Historic Preservation Commission to be eligible for listing as indicated on the zoning map. Isn't that a better description of the buildings that the commission should be tasked with reviewing, or I guess, oversight over, than just every building in this one district? And I know, these are probably not things you might have discussed, and so I might be asking you to step up a little outside, but as chair, I'm gonna ask it anyway.
It's in red. We think that that's important.
Yeah,
Yes, that takes it outside the district to the National Registry
And
buildings.
so that's where, if we can, let's
Transition.
goes into section 5.14, not 50, that's my fault. No, we're going from 12
we can come back to it, but I wanna get our toes wet in 5.14 real quick here. Because that's where I see F in 5.14, which Josh just read, addressing this 4.1 in the comp plan. Amending the district ordinance to make historic protection ordinance that applies to all listed structures in their inside and outside the district. Because right now, we have this great map here, that looks like 10. Eight, well, I see 10 numbers.
Take out
Um,
1544 Royalsboro and 1532, maybe Royalsboro?
Is it 1335 and 13?
That's it.
Hey, trust me, numbers.
7 and 8.
Seven.
Take
Alright, so
those
we-
out because they were removed by someone.
Alright, so
They're-
these are removed. And so what we're getting at here is I think that 5.14 better addresses both the comp plan and looks at all the historic buildings. Because right now, the way I see it, 12 addresses a district and every building in it, and we have 3 buildings listed. But 12 does not address the buildings outside of the district.
5.14,
Yeah.
as currently interpreted, has nothing to do with the commission. It's only the codes officer.
So, I agree. And so, I'm gonna tell you my feeling from looking at things, our discussion tonight, and you, give me your initial feedback, okay? To me, I would repeal so much as Article 12 that establishes the district and then the review, and possibly the creation of the commission and move that to 5.14, and use this language outside the district. I am still not convinced that this language should include neighboring or abutting or lots across the street. I think is what it said. I'm not convinced.
This one, sorry. In 5.14,
I-
the last section of 5.14,
In G, it has that language,
yes.
right? And so I'm not sure I like that language. I think the focus should be on the historic buildings themselves and not the other buildings. But doesn't that make more sense than having a district and then having separate oversight over having everything in one place, so that if someone has a question, they know where to go, and they don't have to look at 2 places, compare 2 different ordinances.
May I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
If by moving things around as you're suggesting right now, does it all go into the codes officer's workload?
I mean, I hadn't given it much thought, but I will tell you, if you're putting me on the spot, which I'm gonna let you do, because I respect your answer as to, the qualifications, but I look at my line of work, and if that were qualifications for a judge, I'd be scared to death. And then the other thing I heard, I'm not gonna lie tonight, is essentially, we all, I can't remember how it was said, so, but so, do I think it comes out of you entirely? No. Do I think that maybe a advisory role, like some other commissions, I might get behind that? I don't know. I guess I hadn't gone that far. But my concern is that right now there's 5 members of the commission.
6.
6. But there's 2 members that arguably have the experience to make those decisions, right? And so, to me, I liken it to having a brand new lawyer become a judge and deciding cases. And that's how I'm looking at it right now. And you can convince me otherwise.
Probably using a judge right now is not the best for me.
But that's sort of where my head is at, to give you a perfectly honest answer. but I also don't think taking review out of the commission's hands is appropriate either. So, does that make sense?
Perhaps,
I don't want you to lose a role in the process. What that role looks like, would it be different? I don't know.
So, I think I get what you're saying. If you give me an opportunity to try to surmise it, jump in at any point and tell me if I'm wrong. But it sounds like what you're saying is that a role that might work better is a model like what we have with like a conservation commission, where they can help advise and give feedback and give information and provide some answers to whatever authority has to rule on this, code enforcement officer, for whatever. There's the expectation that they can go through an organization like the Durham Historical District Commission, which we still are talking about, rather than having it be a quasi-judicial role. And because I have the same concerns, because when we start talking about quasi-judicial, it's just a lack of set criteria that the applicant knows seems very difficult to me, because you don't know what you're being judged against. And there's no way for you to work in advance to make sure you're meeting those standards. But I still think that there's a lot of value in getting people who are passionate in volunteering and have experience input all somewhere in the process. That's where is that kind of what, I guess I switched from what I thought you were saying to what I thought I was saying there, but did I capture
Yeah,
what you were getting at?
I mean, that's sort of where my head is. But I'm not, not married to that idea, but that summarizes.
And then the next thing, and I'll grab you real quick after this, and then the next thing is expanding the discussion around where that board or commission comments to be more than just what's within this historic district overlay right here, or historic district, but to all buildings that we know are listed. And so, while the role might change, it would include all of the buildings that we know are listed by the State Historic Preservation Commission, as opposed to just buildings within this district. It's kind of where I'm seeing as a path, not the only path, but a path moving forward. So, Heather?
My concerns around the role as an advisory is that we have seen boards or commissions not actively engaged in a capacity where perhaps they should have been, for whatever reason. And so I have concerns around that. I also have concerns around, while I hope our CEO, if that's where the permitting process happens through, is here, and we have a long tenure and everything's great. We have been in a situation multiple times where we don't have a CEO and another town staff member that's not their role, filling in that role. And so I have concerns around that type of setup.
Yeah.
And
So,
go
ahead, sorry, Heather.
The other thing about, my opinion regarding 12 really strongly relies with defining and standards around what's a contributing resource, because I'm the person who asked how many homes were in the district that were built before 1900. And there are 11. This particular area has a lot of history outside of just the 3 homes that are listed. And so I don't know what the right answer is. To me, it's feeling like a marriage of these 2 articles. But I think that we should not be holding the properties that are not, in my opinion, a contributing resource, and the fact that there's no definitions around what a contributing resource is. Not hostage, but are holding them to this ordinance, correct? But eliminating the district, discussion of completely eliminating the district feels
So I think
But I
that,
definitely don't like the way that this is set up.
so I think that there's opportunity to address the first concern you had there about like in when board or commissions or whatever the name ends up being, right now being the Durham Historic District Commission, when they get engaged, and I think that we can build into future iterations a requirement of, you know, if one of these 8 buildings are being worked on, it is required to get advisement from this organization. That requirement falling on either, whatever entity has to approve that. So they have to, as part of the application process of approving it, reach out to said board or commission and ask for their input. But that doesn't give that board or commission quasi-judicial authority, but does give a written policy of them needing to be engaged, whereas right now, like with some other boards and commissions, they're there to be engaged if the chair of a different board chooses to, right? This would, I think that there's a way to have our cake and eat it too there and say there is a requirement to engage with them. So I think that is an option. Again, the challenge I get back to is like, okay, so you said how many buildings in the district are over?
There's
11.
11
And so, but like,
tall.
then my question is, and I do not want this to sound callous, but are all old buildings historic? Are all in the sense that they require preservation? Is a 105-year-old tool shed that's had a new asphalt roof put on it 3 times a historic building? I don't know, and I'm not asking that to diminish any of the old
Well,
buildings.
that's why I
And
think
so,
they're finding what.
but that's where, so what I'm getting at there is, why are those old buildings not listed by the State Historic Preservation Commission as an important property? There's gotta be some criteria for that to be listed there. And so, if they're not listing them, then the question is, do we as a local municipality want to create ordinance that lists them? And for me, it's just really hard to swallow an ordinance that doesn't have a fair and equitable process for people to see the criteria. Because how can you have an ordinance when, if we think about it in any other facet, if I'm saying you have to apply for a permit, but you're not allowed to see what my criteria are, and I will just tell you whether I think you meet the criteria that the 5 of us think are important. And if you don't like it, I can say, it doesn't matter, you can't appeal it because you're not appealing any set criteria. That would be very hard pill to swallow on anything else. And so I'm just thinking in terms of that equity component, how do we address that, you know? Because I would be very frustrated if there was no speed limits in town, but a police officer could tell me at any given time, depending on what that officer thought, or that iteration thought, we think you were going too fast here, we're writing you a ticket. Well, I didn't know how fast I was supposed to go. Well, that's up for us to decide. That's a really hard pill for me to swallow. Even though I generally do want to see the resources protected, especially when we start having that question around buildings that aren't historic and buildings that are new buildings next to those as well. So that's where I'm at. So, Debbie, you haven't said much. I just want to make sure you have the opportunity to speak. So no one's getting spoken over. You're in between the 2 talkative ones, so it's a little. All right. So, Heather?
How do these get named and why aren't these others on the list?
Heather, you and I are on the same page on this because how did those get on there? Most likely because the owner at the time wanted it on there. So I can speak to the West Durham Methodist Church, not because I was on the board for the nonprofit at the time, but because now I am. And it was put on there as a gold star. It met the criteria for National Registry. The paperwork was all filled out by someone, I think Margaret. It was submitted, and it got the gold star. Houses that are eligible, the owners have, and there are several, the owners have the option of moving forward with that. The main Historic Preservation Commission at the state level has said they qualify, but the owners, I know one owner in the district who lives in a home that qualifies, it doesn't want National Registry because it puts additional restrictions on the property. In town, there are perhaps 200 buildings that might actually qualify because they are built before 1900. I think, to go back to one of the things I think Josh was asking is the 1,500 foot piece, which is J in 5.14. Is that equitable? So I think what you were saying, Josh, and I'm not sure that that's what you were saying or not, but I think I understood you to say that why are buildings within 1,500 feet of a particular registry building limited to what they can do, which by the way hasn't been followed, but that's beside the point. When the equivalent house outside 1,500 feet has no restrictions on it. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'll use myself as an example because I live next to the Western Methodist Church. So there are certain things that I'm not supposed to do because I live within 1,500 feet of the Western Methodist Church, which is on the registry. Prior codes officers didn't follow anything, and I didn't at the time know the rules, so I just got my permits, did what I wanted to. But now that we know them, someone in that district would have to go through some hoops, in theory, to do the same thing I did. It's, within the district, there is at least one house that has historical value in the district that's built before 1900, that's done significant changes to the property that, had they gone through the proper channels, would not have been approved. But it was bypassed somehow or other. And so...
So I have two questions. When you said that there are some buildings that are eligible, but the landowner is choosing not to trigger that, how did that building become eligible? Did the landowner apply, and then after they told, yep, you're a building, they said, never mind, don't put it on me?
So my understanding is no. My understanding is that the state looked at some buildings, but not every building in town, because there are plenty of buildings in town that would qualify.
But do you have a report that states,
I do
we
not.
looked at the buildings and we said these, and we didn't look at these? Because it just feels like, again, it just doesn't feel like a very equitable process.
It isn't.
And also feels like there's an opportunity here for, I don't have, my house is young by your all standard, 1965. That's not an old historic building. Let's say,
Would be in some towns.
let's say it was 1865. And all of a sudden, my neighbor Heather is about to build something that I really don't want her to build over there because I think it's going to be an eyesore. She's going to build a huge Eiffel Tower or something. I say, I'm going to apply to have my house as a historic building, and now that I have that approval, now Heather can't build that glass mansion or whatever because I have that. And that's just where it's like, that feels not equitable to me. And that's the thing I'm really getting at with this, is that it just seems like in its current iteration, the inclusion criteria aren't known, the standards that you have to meet aren't known, and then whether you know whether or not you're living someplace where your neighbor might be able to put those buffers on you is unknown as well. It just feels, something doesn't feel right here for me.
So we could go back to the standards which were in it, that are currently in it, which are in blue and crossed out in Article 12. We could go back to all that. But honestly, it's so specific that it's very likely that the town would bypass it anyway.
So how do we get, there's gotta be standards somewhere, because I might be wrong, but I can't imagine the state Historic Preservation Commission says, we determine what buildings qualify to be listed based off of.
Can I answer that? Because I just Googled it, because I had that question, and I just Googled it. And they do archaeological and architectural surveys to determine if a building is eligible.
Yeah, but just because it's 100 years old, does it make it eligible?
They
Historic preservation.
do the surveys and if it meets the criteria. I didn't look at what the criteria were, but that's, they won't rule it eligible until they get one of these surveys.
And George has the survey that we started several years ago, where before I was on it, the commission went building to building on every road in town and identified buildings before 1800. Did they miss some, Deb? Probably. But there are pictures and there are dates and there are previous owners, although I don't think everything's up to date anymore because it was that long ago. George has those. Correct?
Yeah, I think I can clarify how the ones that are eligible were determined to be eligible. Okay, so Lois accurately indicated that there are 5 that are listed. The Osgood House, the Bliss Inn, the West Durham Methodist Church, the Union Church, and Shiloh Temple. In each of those cases, the property owners applied for listing. And they have to go through the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, which is the screening entity within the state of Maine that reports to the Interior Department that they have reviewed it with a architectural archaeological survey done by qualified professionals. And so then the Interior Department determines whether or not the structure, the history, the architecture, what has happened to the original structure over the decades, because many times they're altered to the point where they forfeit their historical status. Somebody puts a porch on that's totally out of keeping, those sorts of modifications can make it disqualified according to the Interior Department standards, okay? So the 5 listed ones went through that process and they were approved. Now, whether or not the property owner wants to get tax credits or not, this ordinance says you have to meet those standards if you're gonna make any changes whatsoever. Okay, there were, we thought, 5 others that were eligible for listing. And the way that those came to be eligible for listing is that the Maine Department of Transportation, which are the federal funding requirements, and Jerry can help see if I'm not completely accurate, but basically, when they redo an intersection like Royalsboro and Millbrook Road, they have to know that none of those buildings are eligible for listing, because if they are, then they're restricted in what they can do with their road project. So DOT, if you go on the DOT website, you'll see all of the buildings in Durham that they reviewed along the road corridors. Some not.
Just state roads, sorry.
Well, actually, some are not just state roads.
Okay.
But typically, any road that they would be involved in, they are required to do that survey. So they hired architectural or historic preservation specialists to do surveys of all those buildings. And they, if you go onto their website, you can see each property that they show where they are, and they have a determination, eligible or not eligible. Okay? And part of that, and so the 2 that got pulled off, originally, I was contacting the Maine Historic Preservation Commission staff, and they said they did a survey and indicated could be eligible, but they didn't have enough documentation. Like, for example, they haven't gone into the interior of the building. So their report that's on their website says, not eligible, needs further research. So at one point, they had determined that they were eligible, but then they withdrew that official classification because they needed more documentation. When we did the 10 that are on that map, they indicated you should consider them eligible. Subsequently to that, a couple of years ago, I contacted MMA legal staff to say, can we treat them as that? And MMA legal staff said, no, you cannot. If they are not officially listed or officially determined by Maine Historic Preservation Commission to be eligible for listing, you cannot subject them to section 5.14.
So, for a second,
Yep, go
just to make sure, so the DOT eligibility is not the same as the Maine Preservation eligibility.
Let me clarify. The DOT goes by the Maine Historic Preservation Commission. they are required by federal law to respect
It's
that.
like the same way where DOT has to review with DEP about environmental impacts.
So these two were taken off because there wasn't enough information about them. But you're saying that there are more buildings that are listed in the DOT eligibility list other than the ones that are here?
Not in Europe.
Okay.
Those are the only ones that
State
are
law.
officially listed.
Coincidentally, though, the two that were taken off are within 1,500 feet of the Wingate development.
And I think when you talked about how we're gonna do this, we're gonna
Yeah.
talk to commission and then, and so I don't wanna let Lois go from the hot seat, but I think if we're gonna move on, I think we should let her go and then, because if we're gonna start directing questions for George, I have a few.
Yeah, that's what I wanna do here. So if we have any other questions about the changes that are proposed by the Durham Historic District Commission in section 12 or section 5.14. So the changes they propose, not the merits of the change or whatever, literally the changes. This is the time to ask questions. Do you have any additional questions, Heather?
I have a process question.
Okay.
What I'm understanding is that out of this, we're doing the same thing that we did on the plan for the task force, just to make sure that they have clear direction of what we want. I don't think we will arrive at clear direction tonight, but I'm trying to understand what the outcome of this is, what the expectation is, so that we meet that expectation before we enter.
I'll share what my intent was. We know that the Durham Historic District Commission undertook this task. Regardless of why they undertook the task or whatever, we are now here. But what they have is their proposed changes to our ordinance. So they're a little bit ahead, in my mind, of like what the Conservation Commission in task force is, because they're coming and saying, we're heading down the path to make some proposed changes, but we don't know which way to go. They're past that. We now have the proposed changes. So my intent is for us to ask questions about these proposed changes and get the clarification questions out of the way. And then we go into a policy discussion as to what we think should be the proposed changes based off of feedback from them, based off of feedback and discussion. So I think we're
But we're not
further
doing
along.
that tonight.
My plan was to start that discussion. But again, this is just a process of taking these valued input from the commission and bringing it to the board to say, we're hearing that you want to see some changes, and we're taking those very seriously and trying to move in a different direction.
I have one question left.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm reading in this, like, right now I'm on 514 E, no churches or school buildings older than 100 years old. And I see the 100-year-old reference multiple times through these things. And so my question is, 100 years old versus prior to 1900. Can you explain why you want to keep the 100-year-old designation versus setting a date?
We didn't discuss it. That's
So what-
a very good point.
When you put that in there, what did you discuss that caused you to come to 1900?
No, there isn't
It's
1900.
in 5.14, section H, demolition and removal, it says, in order to
Oh, yes,
establish
there is. That's
the
why I
buildings
was
built prior to 1900. So there must have been a discussion as to, that's the number we should put in this ordinance, and I'm just curious as to why it's that versus elsewhere it says 100 years of age.
Because 1900 is what had been used for the survey in the past. The 100 years here, now that it's 2024 and soon 2025, that's not 1900 anymore, is it? So that should have been
So were
changed.
these put in were these edits started 25 years ago?
No,
Okay, because that's, I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
it's
So,
the language that was in there because it's in black. It's the current language and it should have been pointed out and it was not.
So you
To
want
align.
to align with 1900.
I can't make that decision.
Right.
Either
So
you
that-
can make that decision or the commission can make that decision, but I'm an individual
No, no, I
representing
so
the
Heather,
commission.
in terms of process, my intent was, I was under the impression that these are the recommendations to change from the commission,
And now we are considering those recommendations. As the policymakers, we have to decide what goes forward to a public hearing. And so we're taking into their recommendations into consideration and working on bringing that policy to a public hearing. And so that's a perfect example of her question, because I have some comments on that, but now that I understand where the number came from, my comments are more of a policy discussion and not a question discussion in terms of clarification.
So may I ask a question again?
Sure.
So the documents that we gave you may or may not align with the changes that the town planner and the planning board would like to make.
So-
Did the planning board have, I don't know whether the planning
We're
board
only
had,
examining the document that you gave us.
okay, but this is not something I gave you.
So, no, that's the comprehensive.
Right, it says town planner recommendations.
Yeah,
on
this
the-
is,
on the
this,
cover.
this is, we will, when we make a decision on how we move forward with the policy, we're taking recommendations from legal, recommendations from in public, recommendations from you all. And so we're here to find out what your recommendations are, and that's what this is, correct? And that's what we're asking all the questions.
So when it comes to a public hearing, will the public see these two documents, wherever they are?
We
Or will the public see a document that you have rebuilt from the town planner, the commission, legal? Will you rebuild the ordinance with your own language? And if you do, is it possible to have a competing ordinance?
So our goal is to take we are the policymakers, we have to set the policy and bring it forth to the town to vote. That's our goal. And Jerry, if I'm describing the select board wrong at any point, feel free to hop in. And so our goal is to get the feedback from folks like you who work in this venue, and work in this avenue, to make sure we understand your policy and understand the direction you would like it to take. And we know that in the past, you wanted to make sure this get brought forward, and so we're elevating it right up to us. And then we need to then, from your recommendations and the totality of other things we hear, come up with a direction to present to get voted on, like we do with everything else. So in planning board or conservation commission, anyone can bring us what they think is a recommendation, and we can choose to adopt that or change something to create different warrant language based off of our feedback. So we're in that feedback gathering thing right now, and then we will come forward with what we think is a good recommendation for consideration for a town hearing to get additional public feedback, and then come forward with that ordinance. That's my understanding of the policy.
And is there an avenue for an alternative ordinance to be considered by the town? How would a group
There is no.
get something on the warrant? I believe that's not inaccurate.
So.
I think I'm asking a rhetorical question.
Okay, well,
but-
if you don't want to answer it, then it's not necessarily a valuable question.
I think it is a valuable question, because what I just heard her say is that's not correct.
So.
I believe what I'm asking is, if, I don't know, if the commission, if Heather and I, if somebody wants to build their own ordinance for consideration, how does it get on the warrant?
So my understanding, Heather, please jump in terms of building warrant language, that's the purview of the board, that's what we're elected to do. If there's a process for someone to have a citizens initiative and submit something, that is the avenue if someone does not like an ordinance that the town has or doesn't have, would have to follow.
And where would I find that?
I would imagine it's in our,
It's in the
ordinance.
You need a petition with 10% of the.
Sorry, just to clarify,
Oh,
so
sorry.
speaking.
Alan Plummer, code enforcement officer.
And I do know that, Ellen, that's right. As soon as you said 10%, that reminded me.
Yeah, it's a citizen petition.
Yeah,
And there are rules regarding that, and you need 10% of the last voting in the gubernatorial
Right.
election, I believe.
Right,
Okay,
thank
so
you.
that's where that would live.
Yeah, thank you.
Clarification. But in terms of this warrant language, we're just gonna work through your feedback and other people's feedback and try to find something that we can discuss. So, do you have another question about their edits, or is this more about our policy and our further discussion?
I just, it's about,
So I guess, do you have a question for Lois?
no, I have a comment for everybody.
Do you have a question?
I just wanna say thank you,
Yes.
because this helped answer some of my questions. I wish you had given me your personal opinions.
I don't think.
I commend you for not.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
commend you for
She's
not.
doing her job as chair.
I know, but I want,
I agree,
so,
Buy me a drink, we'll talk.
done. But no, I really wanna say thank you, because you've helped, I feel like you've almost given me more questions and thoughts than I.
Good.
So-
A good teacher always gets the person to think more.
So I appreciate it, I just wanted to say thank you, also, we have 4 minutes before we have to extend our meeting, so we should do that
Yes.
soon.
Do we have any more questions for
I was one other
Lisa?
question. In section 514E, where it says no churches or school buildings older than 100 years will be torn down, does that really mean that these buildings can never be torn down and they have to continue to be maintained for another 100 years?
So we went through this with the Parker School on,
And someday we'll go through it with Charlotte Chapel.
yes, I'm sure, and probably with Western Methodist Church. It really is unless there's a safety issue. So unfortunately, the Parker School had been let go for so long, it had deteriorated to the point that it really couldn't be saved, in the opinion of some people, including me, but I'm not a specialist on it. Someone else would have said it could have been saved. In fact, a number of people in town said it should have been saved. So it gets to a point where it can be, can I look over at Alan a minute? What's the word, Alan?
Dangerous building.
Yeah, but what's it called? Condemned, condemned, or,
There's no condemned.
there's no
Dangerous
condemned,
building.
okay, dangerous building, okay. And then it can move forward with a demolition. So, will Shiloh ever get there? I hope not, but nothing lasts forever. So may
I
I,
don't have any more clarification questions on anything here. Do you, Josh, or Heather, or anyone?
so may I put into the record one thing? I would like to thank the commissioners who came, because I had no idea that this was the format. I know you said you were going to chair it when I offered to keep the speaking order, because that's my familiarity of the way a workshop is that it's a committee of the whole, and people get to speak, and you have a speaking order. These people came, including Dave, thinking that they were going to have input,
Oh, I'm sorry.
thinking that it was a workshop model, which means you're at the table, Alan's at the table, Mr. Talbot's at the table, everybody gets to be here, and we face off against each other and we talk. Unfortunately, these people gave up 2.5 hours of their time, and I'm feeling like they didn't get to say it. And I appreciate the fact that you both came, and that Dave came, for as long as he could, because he does run a business. And I know he was frustrated.
Well, I'm sorry if there was a miscommunication as to the rules, and that wasn't the intent. I do want to say thank you very much for coming, and thank you for all this stuff. I'm sure, when we're talking about time and commitment, that this is, while it's some words on paper, it reflects dozens, if not hundreds of hours of work. So, in order for us to continue, we do have to have a motion to extend the meeting. So, is there any-
I make a motion to extend the meeting by 30 minutes.
do we have a second? Any discussion? All approved? Okay, cool. So, again, now that we're in the extended time frame, just want to thank you again, Lois, for coming. Like I said, there's a ton of work that goes into this. I'm sure this reflects hundreds and hundreds of hours of your time and your volunteers' time and the rest of your commission. And so we have a lot of questions because we value your input here, so we really appreciate that.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Can I make my comment?
Sure.
So, this is actually for the commissioners here, time that we brought an ordinance before the town to vote, it always, whether it's a budget or an ordinance, it always goes better when all of the stakeholders and the contributors are on the same page and can all attest to, the fact that it was a comprehensive effort of all of the people involved. And for myself personally, I'm interested in bringing an ordinance that all parties involved that are working on it are, feel good about bringing before the town. And so I hope that we get there.
This all steps in that process for sure. All right, so we have 30 minutes left. Please don't pass this around so we sign the AP warrant so I don't forget. And then we can continue into this discussion here on.
Are we putting George on the hot seat?
Yeah, if we have questions, George, we can ask those as well.
I will and I'll
So George, what's the benefit to the town by having all of the properties in the historic district subject to the ordinance? And what, or is there one, and if so, what is it?
Let me just start out, and I know that the Historical District Commission members who are here and others who weren't here will have the opportunity to watch the video and hear my response. So, I just want to start out by saying that as the Director of Community Development and Planning, the city of, actually the county of Lewis and Clark, which contains Helena, Montana, I was the supervisor for the Historic Preservation Officer for the city of Helena, Montana. Helena has over 60 listed properties and 3 historic districts. I was involved in very controversial projects to review the demolition of the fire tower from 1868, or whatever it was, that had been modified. So I've dealt with this stuff, and I do not consider myself to be anyone near qualified to make decisions on whether something meets the interior department guidelines or is a contributing structure or any of this. You really need, just like the subdivision review of an engineering plan, you need to have someone that's qualified to review those plans. And one of the concerns, and I've voiced them to the Historical District Commission, I was asked by Candy Spix, the prior chair of the commission, to assist them in implementing recommendations to the comprehensive plan. So I spent 2 years reviewing the ordinance, getting input from the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, from checking with MMA Legal Services, and I basically prepared a report that you all have copies of, presented that to the Historic District Commission in August of 2022. So that report contains recommendations for my professional analysis of the structure that you have. I think your questions and concerns about them being a quasi-judicial body under Maine law, and I did check with the new town attorney, they are a quasi-judicial board, I'm sorry. I checked with MMA attorneys at the recent conference. So they are required by Maine law to provide due process to every applicant and neighbors to projects that are being proposed within the district. The jurisdiction starts and ends at the district. And so I just have seen from day one that you have these 3 overlapping jurisdictions. Because we talked about the commission, we talked about the code officer, the planning board also has jurisdiction of any project that comes in. As you saw with Wingate Farm, they were involved in the process. And the multiple provisions within the ordinance, you have Article 5, which has 5.14. You have Article 12, which creates districts through a specific process where property owners, at least 50% of anyone in the district has to vote in favor of creation of the district. They're going to be subject to 5.14 applies to the listed or eligible and every property within 1,500 feet. One of the things that we are in agreement on is the need to scale that down. And so there's some discussion whether it should just be the properties that are listed or eligible, or should it be the abutting properties, the ones across the street? The town attorney has reservations about that, because you're basically creating de facto districts without going through the process called for in Article 12. So there are many competing and conflicting provisions within 5.14 and Article 12. So I think you've either got to go one way or the other. And, you know, whether you want to stick with historic districts and go through the process of creating them and have a proper quasi-judicial review of projects within that with qualified personnel, either consultants or staff members, or if you can find a nonprofit like Maine Preservation, or the Maine Historic Preservation Commission has already said they will not do regulatory reviews for you. They will do advisory reviews, but that's just as a courtesy, it's not anything official. So this whole system, it really is designed for places like Helena, Montana, or Thompson, Maine, or Castine, where you have historic neighborhoods, where the character of each of those buildings, and there are so many of them, they're creating the appearance of historic districts. So if you think about downtown Yarmouth, you go into some of those neighborhoods where virtually everything is eligible for listing. If someone comes in and does something completely out of character, even if a building is not officially listed or even eligible for listing, it may still be a contributing structure. That's somewhat of a
I see,
nebulous
thank
term.
you, that's helpful.
Yeah.
So quick question
Yeah.
about this, George. So in those instances, are those historic districts ones that have been established by 50% plus of people who live
Yes.
in that? And so in that instance, that's how you get that.
It's kind of like a homeowners association.
Well, so that's what I'm trying to understand. Like, so
You're
what you're
saying,
saying,
we're not gonna allow anybody in this subdivision to do something that's gonna block everybody.
so what they're saying there is, regardless of what my house is, I'm voting to be part of this district and agreeing to standards and whether it's contributing at that point. Is that how our historic district was made?
Well,
Do we know?
no, we don't know. We don't know the process. We're assuming, because they actually drew specific boundaries, we're assuming that they went through the process. I think we could just accept that they did. But as to whether or not people understood the implications of it at the time, and certainly current property owners, as Lois has indicated, are trying to educate people of the requirements, but
Because if someone moves out of a historic district that's been voted in and someone else moves in, they can't say, well, I wouldn't have voted for this
No.
district. It's like, no, you are
it's
getting,
in, it's in.
okay.
And it has to be approved at a town meeting.
So functionally,
Even if the 50% thing happens, it has to be.
Still has to go to town meeting.
Because it's a zone.
That's correct.
so 50% of people within a community say, we want to call this a historic district and agree to set standards. 50%
of the
plus
people that live
within
there,
that, within that district,
Within the proposed
So-
district.
within that district say, we want this to be
The
a
historic
district.
district commission makes recommendations.
And then they propose that as a zone, and then you have to be approved at the town meeting to have that zone added.
And then it goes on the zoning map.
Okay, and so regardless of whether we know how our historic district commission historic district came to be, we have one on the map.
Correct.
And so that's where we start getting this question.
And you
is that-
may have 5 other pseudo districts, de facto districts.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand the process.
Yep.
Josh, you had a question.
I have multiple questions, but I'll start with this. In your prior employment, who made up the historic district commission?
Well, there were, and it's encouraging to me that they have added a few people with some expertise on these issues. When I did my report, they had nobody of that indication of qualifications. But in, like Helena, Montana, they had a lawyer who had training in architectural and historic preservation. So she provided advisory input to the Helena Historic District Commission in the same way that I provide input to the local planning board, because I've had the qualifications and the training to do that. So,
Sorry, quick question.
yeah,
That lawyer, did they work for the town of Helena?
They worked,
or was
they
it
were
a-
joint
were they a
employee
consultant?
of they were an employee of the county, but they also, were appointed by the, city.
But they weren't a member or a volunteer of the historical.
They were a paid employee. So, the bottom line is, if the town is going to do this, it's absolutely critical, given the quasi-judicial nature of it, that you have qualified people either on the committee or providing professional input to the committee for making decisions on a very complicated issue.
And so, real quick, before, if you don't mind, Heather, to draw a parallel, so I'm trying to understand this. With the planning board, we have members who are quasi-judicial and make a determination.
Mhm.
But when they're making those determinations, it's being their applicants are presenting using engineering, and they're paying into a fund so we can get third-party engineering. And then in terms of policy, we have a lawyer, and in terms of planning, we have a full-time, you as a planner.
Right.
So that's kind of the framework, so if you had a historic district commission, in the Helena scenario, they have that third-party consultant as the lawyer, and I'm assuming if someone was trying to do something, they brought in their architects, the planning commission could then bring in additional architects to review the work, and so that's what you're saying, with it being quasi-judicial, you need to have a framework like that to make sure that there is due process, for applicants and for the review.
Correct.
Heather, sorry.
So
Nancy?
no, it's fine, I was in that same line of thinking.
Green lights, think alike.
Yeah, actually, right from the get-go, when I was reading through all of this stuff, there's two things that come to mind all the time when we're talking about planning in the town and aligning with the comp plan and all of the things, and I beat the drum over and over about buffering. And so part of what I see is a pathway to, the abutter and the 1,500 foot, all of those things all comes back to buffering for me. But the other thing is the third-party review by, a consultant or somebody who does that in the same way that we have the subdivisions go through third-party review. And you're saying that main preservation, I don't have the right words, but they do reviews, what did you say?
They're a private organization, and I
Yeah.
believe, Jerry, you contacted them about providing advisory opinions to the Historic District Commission.
Okay,
As
with
kind
that,
of an interim step.
as an interim step, but is there something that exists, the way that we can bring on third-party reviews for subdivisions for historic?
What you would have to do, well, if it's before the planning board, which that only happens if there's a subdivision application or a commercial site plan application. The planning board, the applicants are required to provide a peer review escrow fund
Right.
to cover the town costs of hiring those consultants. So unless you put something like that in place for projects within the historic district, then either the town would have to fund that or some private organization. So that's part of the problem, is where are the resources gonna be coming from
Yeah, I
to
can
do
answer
this,
part of
to
your
do
question.
this properly? And that's a, if you wanna propose a budget for the town meeting for historic preservation, I think that's what you need to do.
Okay.
I can answer your element of that question, so like in terms of third-party review, when I worked in consulting, our firm had archaeologists, our firm had historical building evaluators, cause when we were, soup to nuts on these projects, we could do everything. And so that exists, there's archaeologists who could be hired here to do a third-party review, there's historic building architects that work, and that does exist.
And that feels burdensome to the taxpayer to put that in the budget for the taxpayers to assume the cost of that, but that also feels burdensome to the homeowner, especially if they haven't been designated. I don't really know how I feel about all of this, I'm sorry, I'm just processing out loud.
I think to draw a parallel to what you're saying is that burden, in the current example, if somebody is going to put in a subdivision or something that requires them to get a permit, that burden falls on the applicant. And so if we are saying that we're trying to model the review
for this quasi judicial organization, the same way we model it for the planning board, you would have the same process. The applicant comes forward and wants to do something within the district or within the area that is zoned, and the staff have to check the standards to make sure they meet the standards, and then if they need third-party review. But the challenge there is we don't have written standards.
Right, and so that
And so-
goes back
and
to
that's
what the other
where
thing
I
I was
think-
gonna say, is that when, like, I was on the appeals board before I was on this board, and I certainly have attended my fair share of planning boards and have gone through the planning board process myself multiple times. Finding a fact is part of that process, and so is it required, since they're quasi judicial, that they are finding fact, and if they are, how does that happen when we don't have standards for them to find fact of?
Well, that's a legal question, I think you need to explore, but based on what I've learned, I think they should be preparing findings of fact for their decisions.
Because if they don't, how does someone appeal a decision?
Exactly, that's right.
That was what I was getting at earlier. And I think, Josh, you were alluding to that too, like if you're trying a case and there's not a set of standards and there's not an appeal process and whatever, it just doesn't feel like it's equitable. But it sounds like, based off of what we're hearing from legal counsel, it might also not be legal, because if you have a quasi judicial board that needs to be finding a fact, but they're not providing those standards and they're not providing that appeal process, that can be legal exposure for us. Does that sound?
Yeah, and I think what it all boiled down to, and just think about this, the city of Portland right now is embroiled in one of these big disputes over the Children's Museum. And that shows you how complicated this is, because initially, the Historic District Commission there determined that that building was not historic, and it could be torn down by the museum. And now it's being appealed to the court. So if you have a building that iconic, that significant, and they don't agree on whether it's historic or not, this is the type of thing that you're dealing with, and also the stakes that you're dealing with is challenged.
So this is just to, let's follow with that example real quick. If that's here, and someone wants to tear that building down, and in the Historic District Commission rules yay or nay, what's the person's appeal process?
Board of Appeals.
But then what standards is the Board of Appeals judging it by?
They would go by, since you don't do de novo reviews, they would basically review the process and determine whether the process followed the ordinance and whether the Historic District Commission applied the provisions of the ordinance. And then they would either uphold it, or they would remand it back to the board for development of findings of fact, which they did in the case of planning board since I've been here.
So what happens?
And then, or they could uphold the decision of the commission.
What happens if I own this building and I don't, make that very clear, just using this for example, and I have a great lawyer who's got experience, and I bring in an architect and I say, all of these folks agree that this does not meet the standards, it's not meets the standards of the state, it doesn't meet the standards here. This is just an old building that I'm allowed to pull down, and I'm getting told no. How does the town defend that?
Well, what would happen is they would go to the Board of Appeals, and then the Board of Appeals would make a decision, either to uphold the decision of the commission, to remand it back to them, or to overturn the decision of the commission.
So the Board of Appeals doesn't currently have a mechanism to bring in their own architect.
No, they would base it on the record before that commission. So then, if someone were not accepting of that decision, then they would appeal to the Superior Court.
Yeah. This just feels messy.
Feels like a burden.
Well,
But if you own one building and you have to maintain it.
Way overkill for the buildings that you have.
and so, sorry, I'll let you go ahead.
Do you think, I mean, and we don't know, right, it was 1994, do you think the intent of the historic district was to try to establish, because there are 12 homes that were built before 1900 in that particular area, it was like the hot spot of town way back when. Do you think that what they were trying to do was establish the area to be like you were talking about in Yarmouth? And that we just didn't have the appropriate mechanism to be able to maintain that?
I was told by a member of the commission, and it rings true in my experience, that zoning usually is reactionary, and so they were concerned about a particular use going into that area, and saw that this was the mechanism to prevent that from happening, so.
So I feel,
But we don't know whether the people who live there not had the vote, the 50% of the people within that. We don't have a paper trail of how that came about. I guess it doesn't really matter.
right. So the other thing that I just have a comment on is the buffer, the 1,500-foot buffer and that type of stuff. A very old planning board chair, and I had a conversation. Wow, what is that?
There's a car hit a deer on Stack.
Oh.
So be careful on your way home if you're on Stack.
The conversation was, do you want a gas station to go in directly across from your house? Because at the time, the mechanism that we have in our ordinance, and quite frankly, we're still in that type of situation, could pretty much go anywhere in town if they can check the boxes. And so this was a way to try to protect these historic buildings from Irving going in right next to it or right across the street.
I guess it doesn't really matter how it came about. Right now we have a historic district, and now our question is how we move through it. I think this is really good information on how the process, if we were to do it today, is supposed to go, and I think that's important context. But I think now our next question is, where do we go from here in light of the comprehensive plan, in light of the lawyers' feedback, in light of our great Historic District Commission's input and feedback here, in light of all the questions we've asked and learned tonight. So that's our next step, I think. Does anyone have any other questions about the details for George? Heather, do you have a question for George?
It's a question for George and maybe a comment for the commission, or both, for both. This is a very different board than when this process started. And I think all of us have alluded to the fact that we don't love the way that this is. And nobody needs, you don't need to answer this now, but I wonder if there's, knowing how this board is digesting this information, some sort of revision to 12 and 5, is it 5?
Yeah.
I don't know why I keep
So
saying
I think
15.
what you're getting at, I think that we need to make our proposed changes amongst us as a board. And if we feel from that process we want to go back to,
Is that right though? Because I thought that what happened is that they come to us with recommendations and we say yes or no. So I'm not trying to split hairs, I'm just making sure that we're doing it the right way.
Think about it this way. It's our job to develop warrant language, right? And to bring something to the town meeting. And we asked, or we have recommendations from the entity in town that deals with this daily. Just like we got those same recommendations from the, just like previous boards got the same recommendations from the Conservation Commission.
I understand.
And from the Planning Board. We're at the point where we have their recommendations. And so ultimately, the board has to decide what's going on the warrant, taking into consideration all those things, and then eventually public comment at a public hearing, because we have to have a public hearing if anything's going up. So I feel like we are at the point where we need to now start digesting their recommendations. And like you said, it's important that we try to find where we are aligned. We also need to find out where we are compared to what we have in front of us right here. Because I'm not aligned with everything here, but I'm not disaligned, that's not a word, with everything here either. So I think we are in that part of the process. From here, I think that the best thing we can do is talk about what changes we are comfortable with, because I don't believe it's the job of the board to just say, we take whatever changes are recommended to us, and whether the board believes it or not, that's the warrant language on the next
No,
one.
no,
And
but
so
I
that's why
thought
I'm
what we
saying-
did is they make their recommendations and we say, yes, move forward, or no, don't. I didn't think that we made changes to recommendations. We either accept them or we don't accept them.
So-
That's what I thought.
So, but we can not accept these elements of this recommendation.
Okay.
And so that's where we're in the process of determining, do we accept this or do we not accept this? And this is, it's trying to save the time of, if this is a hard no, we're not bringing it to the warrant language, we need to have a conversation now, rather than making everyone go through all of that stuff to show up the week before we write warrant language and say, we are not comfortable with any of this at all. We have this legal question, we have this legal question, this is a major concern.
No, I understand that.
A board can bring an illegal recommendation to us and say, please put this on there. And if we say, no, this isn't legal, we're now in a situation where you've put in all this work this year, this isn't legal, come back next year, there's not enough time for us to figure that out. And that's why I want to take this up early, so we can figure out how to get to the point where we're not using everyone's time, and then come February, when we have all our hearings, we say, whoa, hard no for us, and it's too late to address it.
Right.
And I don't want to get to that, because that can be really frustrating for all parties involved.
Yeah, I don't wanna get there, I don't want that to be there either. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what comes next.
But yeah, that's what we're
Okay.
what we're talking about here. So I think what we need to do is we need to discuss, with all the answers we get tonight and all the information we have here and all the recommendations we have here, where we are as a board. And then if we feel the need, if this is a hard yes, no questions, cool, we're good to go. And we just figure out when it's gonna be discussed at a town hearing. If this is a no for us, we have to figure out where we're at no, and then we can decide as a board, now do we go, we wanna bring it back to the appropriate body to give us additional feedback and workshop it there.
Okay, we have
You
to
know?
be done, it's 9:20.
I know, but does that process work for everybody? We're definitely not getting to in the next 1 minute and 10 seconds, a discussion on what we like here or not, but I feel like this is a really good fact-finding mission for us.
Mhm.
Does everyone agree with that process? Which means we gotta put it on a meeting to discuss. So, Jerry and I will work on
Josh, you need to
the
sign.
schedule there. All right, anything else here for today? Where's our thing? Do we need an executive session? All right, I'm not seeing any. Do I have a motion to adjourn? And a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor? No opposition?
Thank you,
Usually get
George.
unanimous consent on that one. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, that was long.
We knew, only one extension. We knew it was gonna be long.